Oh, hello. Welcome to a Halloween live stream. I am your host, Gilman, and joining me is the Wolfman.
Arrow.
Yeah, Richard Nixon, the Wolfman, because that's the thing.
Yep.
Also, just below me here is the Invisible Man. Also, the Silent Man.
Yeah, I'm silent. Yeah. And so so you can't see me, so you can't hear me either. Yeah. Hello, everybody.
And our very special guest on this Halloween live stream. It's M, aka Evelyn O'Connell from Verbal Diorama.
Hello, you can just call
Welcome
me
to the
Evie.
We can call you Evie. Yeah.
Yeah,
let's stick with
the
that.
Benbridge scholars have rejected me again, so I'm here.
We are right
Excellent.
below them in the list of prestige.
We're often confused, from what I understand. There's a lot of comments coming in already, which is great to see. Welcome to the live stream, everybody. As I said, this is our Halloween live stream. We'll get to some comments in a sec. I'll just run through a couple of housekeeping bits and bobs. We are, in fact, deciding the best Guillermo del Toro movie as picked by M.
Yep.
We'll get to that in a moment. We'll just kind of get into Guillermo del Toro stuff in the second half. We'll kind of have an intro with M and all that kind of stuff if this is your first time joining us on the live stream. We don't usually dress like this, but we thought we'd make a special
Speak for
effort.
yourself.
We've even gone... Well, true, yeah. Sometimes Tim does. This is just Tim's Saturday night.
Yeah.
I will hasten to add that I can barely breathe or see in this mask, so I apologize in advance if it doesn't last the whole time, but I am trying to be Gilman from The Creature Walks Among Us, which is the third movie. A little something that looks like this. That is my attempt at that costume. Tim is, of course, the Wolfman, a classic. Matt is, of course, the Invisible Man. And M is Evie. There we go.
Yeah, I don't have the hair or sadly the looks of Rachel Weisz, and I do apologise. But then, to be honest, no, not many people do.
This is true.
Yeah.
Rachel Weisz is a goddess, so
Yeah.
just like trying my best.
If I also thought, I'm sorry I don't like Daniel Craig. Like, well, yeah, you know. And I would like to give a little quick shout out to our patrons as well as we let's see if I can maneuver. I literally can't see the menu at the moment, by the way, so I'm trying to. I don't know if you can tell. There's tiny little holes above the eyes here that I'm seeing through. So bear with me. I think it's this one. Yay! There we go.
Hey, there we go.
Lovely patrons. The executive producers, of course, at the top there. You probably know them if you've ever listened to the show. And then many other of our patrons there, including, I'm sure plenty of names you probably recognise. If you're a regular on our Discord, you'll certainly recognise plenty of these names. And thank you very much to everybody for supporting the show, making this possible, making our costumes possible, making the live stream possible, all that good stuff. Your support is always appreciated. And we've got a lovely little overlay, a little Halloween-themed overlay that I covered in slime.
Yeah.
And John did
I'll
customise our little avatars there as well to
yes,
feel a bit more
illustrations
appropriate.
courtesy of the amazing John Scarrett, who does all
As
our,
always.
our regular illustrations.
Who was last month's guest on the live stream. So if you haven't already checked that out, go back and check out September's live stream. John was fantastic. We talked about the films of David Fincher last month, which was a fantastic discussion that we had. And we'll get to Del Toro a bit later on. Let's go to some comments, shall we, before we get on to some more
I
chat.
assume we're all sounding okay to the.
Yeah, let us know.
M sounds fine. M sounds normal. Tim
Really?
mostly lower.
That's the first time anyone's ever said that to me.
Tim's lower jaw normal. Jack and I possibly questionable.
Yeah.
No, you sound fine.
I assume I sound like a
It's
bit of
just
box
there's no
there.
lips. The lip reading is non-existent.
The
Yeah.
social cues of me smiling and going means nothing. I'm doing nothing.
We appreciate it nonetheless. Right, let's have a look at some comments. Like I said, I apologise if I keep leaning in and leaning around and stuff. I literally can't see a thing. So
That's what Gilman says if he can speak. I apologize
Hold still so I can kill you because I can't see you otherwise.
I see Evie, Wolfman, Tim, Jack, but no one else in the other window. Oh, how mysterious. This all seems perfectly normal. Yes, it
Yep.
does. Come for the Gillman, stay for the Wolfman. You know the score, Bradley. Thank you very much for joining us. Can we breathe all right? Matt, can you breathe all right?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm good. This is, in fact, not a real nose.
What?
How can I breathe at all?
How do you breathe without a nose? Oh my god.
How do I smell? Fantastic.
We have some highlights of the comments so far. Jack is doing his best Bane impression. I mean, I could do a Bane impression
yes.
if I wanted to. Nobody cared about me until I became the Gillman.
I've been haunting Gotham's waters.
It's a really shit Killer Croc after all, it turns out.
Yeah.
I'm Hush from Batman now.
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah, we're just turning into Batman villains. Oh my god.
Well,
So,
I'm in the wrong universe then, aren't I? Because I don't think there's any Batman villains that quite look like this. So
you Celine Kyle on a day off.
You're Harley
don't
Quinn
even
when she
go there. Look, I'm already comparing myself to Rachel Weisz, and I'm already selling myself short. And now you're bringing Michelle Pfeiffer into it. I mean, come on. I got no chance.
You could be Harley Quinn when she was still working on her doctorate, you know.
Yeah,
Ooh.
Dr. Harley Quinn.
You know, Margot Robbie. How am I supposed to compare to that?
I am kind of conscious that it's just three dudes asking the only female guest we've ever had to be like, compare yourself to these other women.
I mean,
yeah, incredibly successful, talented, wealthy, beautiful women.
And then there's the other ones, right? Yeah.
Fuck, I am screwed.
I'm all right. Claude Rains is dead, so I'm winning that one. Respect to you, Claude Rains. I'm sorry you're dead.
In case you're listening, dead.
In case you're listening in the afterlife. Not you, fucking Kevin Bacon. You stay over there.
No, you're Invisible Man, not Hollow Man. This is a clear distinction we have.
Chevy Chase, you can also get out.
Oh dear. Well, let's get a little intro from you.
Yes.
If the listeners aren't familiar with you, they might recognize the little logo on my microphone here. They might recognize the little logo down the bottom there. Tell us a little bit about you and a bit about Verbal Diorama.
I mean, you're seriously repping with the holographic sticker that I sent you. And I'm very, very grateful for that. Although people can't see it's holographic. So, and the fridge magnet as well. Yeah. So I have no idea if anyone is watching this who actually knows who I am. Literally, I am just like some weird woman who's just turned up on your live feed. So yeah, my name is Em, not Evie, although I wish. And my podcast is called Verbal Diorama, and it's basically all about the history and legacy of movies you know and movies you don't. I'm not going to sing the theme song, although it is banging. I always say
it's a kick-ass
come for the theme song. Come for the theme song. Stay for the content, because the content's decent as well. But the one thing that I get is people saying that they love the theme song. So I'm just like, I'll take it. Literally, if people want to come and listen to the theme song and then think, oh, I might want to listen to the rest of this. It's not as good as the theme song, I'll be honest, because there's not a lot that is. But it's decent after the theme song. And it's just literally, I am fascinated about the making of movies, about how stuff comes about, the production stories, all of that sort of stuff. And I've been fascinated ever since I was little. So really ever since I saw Jurassic Park. And it was like, whoa, like, oh my God, this is incredible. And just to get a little Keanu Reeves quote in there, because, I like to mention him. But yeah, that's basically why I started a podcast, was because I wanted to know for myself how things were made. And then it was like, well, if I'm interested, then maybe other people will be interested as well. And it turns out, like, 2 or 3 people are, which is awesome. And one of them's here right now. So out of like the 2 or 3 people that listen, so it's all good, and I love what I do. So I'm really genuinely grateful to be here with you guys, because I love your podcast. I featured your podcast, so I only feature podcasts that I like. So
there we go. Yeah, that was kind of the initial connection, wasn't it? Through film stories and that kind of.
Yeah, you didn't want to know me before then. I was DMing all the time. I was like, please talk to me, and you were like, no, we're not interested. And then I was like, how about I feature you in film stories? You were like, yep, now we're friends.
I think you'll find I reached out first. Thank you very much. With the Jaws podcast, because we did a Jaws 2 that was our first episode. That was the initial contact. Thank you very much. Credit to the Gill man where credit is due.
The threatening Gill man.
Gill man.
My nose!
No one cares about Gill man.
How dare you?
Guillermo del Toro cares about Gill man.
Guillermo del Toro loves a good Gill man, doesn't he?
Guillermo del Toro, what the fuck, Gill man?
Sexy Gill man. That's what we want. We want more sexy Gill men in the world.
We've got the sexiest one here.
The one with no articulation in its face, the sexiest thing you can have in a person.
Well, like I said on Twitter, in the video that you did say sex o'clock, and I know it was all the whole German thing, and I get that.
Yeah,
but I was a bit like, okay, is he trying to get the link there into Sexy Gillman time from The Shape of Water? Yeah. And we're meeting at sex o'clock, and I was like, I did not sign up for sex o'clock. I'm down, but I didn't sign up for that.
Then you haven't seen Shape of Water. There we go, confirmed. Penis has a thank you for the little fish penis there, Matthew. Appreciate that. Listen to a couple of episodes. It's good. There we go. Confirmed listener of Verbal Diorama. Oh,
thank you
I think
very
I've got
much.
a visitor here as well.
Oh, we've got a feline visitor. I don't have one right now. Don't know where she is, but
hold on.
Jack, you're ruining the illusion!
It's hideous!
Just like Disneyland, you stay in there even if you puke.
Yeah. Full, what are they called? Like cast members or whatever the fuck they're typed.
Yes.
Got to stay in character the whole time. And that's quite interesting, actually. How do they stay in character the whole time? If you're having a really shit day, some kid's coming up to you and you're Cinderella and you have to be like, oh, I'm so happy all the time. I love Prince Charming. Yeah, how do you do that? I'd be like, fuck off. I'm having a shit day.
And that's why you're not a cast member at
Disneyland. That's why Walt Disney
Oddly enough, I have an answer for that. There's a YouTuber called Abelina Sabrina. She used to work for Disney in the parks. Turns out it's not actually the bad days you got to worry about. It's the good days. Because on occasion, just inadvertently, say goodbye to Nose, everybody. Bye.
Bye, Nose.
Yes, the thing with the casting, it's called Hanging with Mickey or Hanging with Minnie, is when you're in the costume as the character. And of course, most importantly, you stay silent. And on a good day, you think, that kid was really nice. They had a great time. They were really polite, etc., etc. And they give them a hug, and they just say, "Thank you," or whatever, and they say, "You're welcome," or just something inadvertently comes out as a natural response, or "Have a great day," or something, just something simple. And the problem is, as they're running away, they said, "Oh, Mickey just said, have a great day. It's so cool." And you've made that kid's life. That is like so important to them. That's so cool. And the senior members of staff will come over and say, "You cannot ever, ever do that." Like, why? It's like, because every time that kid comes back, I'm like, "Do you remember me? You spoke to me last time." So staying in character and just being distant is actually apparently quite easy, because you can go, that's fine. But being yourself on a happy day where you just want to express something positive, say it's like a Make-A-Wish thing, or somebody's terminally ill or something, it's like you want to make a connection. I've made this very serious. You want to make a connection, but you can't, because you risk, ruining the illusion. And that's like the argument But the truth is, it's just corporate bullshit. So yeah.
My favorite
Oh.
Disneyland costume fact is that on very hot days, all of the people who are in like the full costumes, not necessarily like the Disney princesses, but your Minnies and your Mickeys and your Plutos and people, they have another cast member who just hangs around near them in case it gets so hot that they pass out inside the costume.
Oh,
and
wow.
The other cast member has to run up and go, "Oh, look, he's fallen asleep. Oh dear."
Yeah.
And then just drag their like dying corpse away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Lovely.
That would traumatize me if I saw like Mickey Mouse claps just
Yeah.
be dragged away.
Well, there's that video of Helen Parr, the Elastigirl from Incredibles, like
Oh,
it's
I've seen
Elastigirl,
that.
waving, and the dunk face falls off.
Yeah.
Horrifying. I was like, oh no, she's gotta go now. Bye. Universal monster shit right there.
So we actually have a question for you, Em, coming in from Meatball Guy 1, who's a regular in our chat. How long does it take you to do an episode? Is it hours of research beforehand, or is scripting and writing the hardest part to do? And basically, I want to kind of drill into your process, because we have a fairly specific process from our side of things when it's coming to like writing pitches and stuff. But you're very much a more like open discussion. But I can really tell, and there's something I kind of like was drawn to with your show, the level of research you do. There's something, something I really gravitate towards when I'm researching movies and stuff. So what is kind of your process to create an episode of Verbal Diorama?
I mean, bear in mind as well, obviously, you three can all work together to an extent. And you all will take control. Well, no, I know you don't. I know you all hate each other, really. This has become apparent to me. But, you know, for the public's sake, you all work together, you get along with each other, and, you know, you can do, there's a bits of making a podcast that you can all kind of take and kind of run with. Whereas for me, I am it. So I do everything. I don't have anyone to assist. If I'm feeling ill, then it's kind of tough. I just kind of have to get on with it. So, yes, research is incredibly time consuming for me. I think that a lot of people would assume that it's just a case of, going on a Wikipedia page and there's your episode. Nah. First of all, don't trust everything you read on Wikipedia, because literally anyone can make that shit up. Anyone can go on Wikipedia and write whatever they want. So the process for me is I do occasionally use Wikipedia just because, you know, there's tends to be quite a lot of links to other things, and you can kind of pick up some basic information. But yeah, it's always a process of fact checking as well. If you read something on any website, not just Wikipedia, any website, there's always got to be a process of fact checking that, because the last thing I want to do is say something on my podcast that's wrong. I have. I fully admit.
Oh, we have too. Yeah, absolutely.
I've made mistakes. I've said the wrong name. I've said a wrong date. You know, all of that sort of stuff. And that's just me being an idiot. That's not me. Oh, I found that information out. It's wrong. It's just I've said the wrong thing. And you know, shit like that happens. There's not much you can do about it. But yeah, the process of researching an episode of my podcast. Most episodes take. I'm going to try and estimate this. I would say about 10 to 12 hours of research.
Wow.
Ish. Just depends on the episode, really.
Yeah.
And then, I write the episode up, so I make sure all of the facts are there. Last thing I want to do is start, spewing out a load of stuff without the facts in front of me, because that doesn't work for a podcast like mine. So yeah, it's a lot of research. It's a little bit of writing, but I'm used to writing, so that's kind of easy for me. Is the writing side of it, and the social media side of it is kind of easy as well. But yeah, anytime you speak to Verbal Diorama on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, that's always me. All of the artwork is me. The music is not me because I'm not that talented. But everything else is purely me. So it's a busy life that I lead. But I wouldn't have it any other way, because I love what I do, and I love putting stuff out, and I love when, you know, people turn around and they say, "Oh, I learned something from your episode. Oh, I didn't know that. That's amazing." And it's amazing to me as well, the stuff that I find out. So yeah, that's a really cool question, actually. I like that.
What's your favourite fact that you've uncovered about a movie you love in the process?
That's a sideline. That's a bastard move.
That is a horrible thing.
What's your favourite episode?
I've got like
favourite fact.
Favourite fact. Okay, well, I've 121 episodes. What's my favourite one out of 121? Oh my gosh, you've really put me on the spot now.
Or one that just sticks in your mind as particularly memorable that you didn't know before going into to start your research.
I think, okay, so the one that's kind of coming to my mind, and it's only coming to my mind because I know the movie was on TV here in the UK earlier, and it's one of my favourites. And it was basically all of the work that went into making Kubo and the Two Strings.
Wow, yeah.
Any stop motion animation movie. I'm a huge fan of animation for starting point. I love animation, but anything that Leica does, they just put so much work into. I mean, any stop motion animation is an incredible amount of work. Even if you go back to something like The Nightmare Before Christmas, which is directed by Henry Selick and not Tim Burton. Because people get that wrong all the time. It's not Tim Burton who directed that movie. He produced that movie. There's a fact for you. I've not done that episode, but there's a fact. Kubo and the Two Strings was the first Leica movie that I covered. And I've since done Coraline as well. And Coraline is similarly outstanding. But there's something about Kubo that it's just so incredible when how they made that kind of huge snake monster and how that monster moves, and it's also fluid and beautiful. And I'm just a huge fan of anything like that. I found some really brilliant gifts. No, not gifts. Gifts. I found some gifts as well. Some wonderful gifts from that movie of how they made stuff, and it blows my mind. It genuinely Leica blow my mind. And anyone who's watching this who don't know who Leica Studios are, please, they are such incredible movies to watch at Halloween just generally. Movies like Coraline, like Paranorman, really great family movies. Literally everyone can sit and watch them. But they're so technologically advanced. They're so beautifully made. And they all don't make enough money at the box office.
This is true.
They all struggled really badly at the box office. And this is a studio. If that studio goes under, I will be very, very upset. So shout out to Leica.
Well, I would be very surprised if Leica ever go. So Leica's fascinating because I obviously agree with you 100%. If people haven't seen, and it's one of those rare things you can say, the entire body of work is spectacular. Yeah. There's like, this one is very good. That's about as bad as you'll get in terms of criticism. Like Missing Link has some moments where I'm like, yeah, this is whining a little, but it's not bad. It's a fantastic movie and a really good family film. But Leica, if I remember correctly, is owned by one of the major shareholders, if not one of the major, central children of the dude or the family that runs Nike or Nike, depending on how you want to pronounce it.
That's correct, yeah.
It is literally a rich kid's passion project, and I am so very here for that. Fund the arts, you bastards.
Yeah, normally you'd be like, oh, rich white boy, what are you doing with this? But now I'm just like, yes, rich white boy, please fund this studio forever.
Yeah, sink that shoe money into the plasticine.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, as you say with Kubo, it's the amount of stuff beforehand as well, the pre-production research into mythology and history and
it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's amazing. And as you say, with the GIFs and things, so many behind-the-scenes time lapses. Oh, I'm being very expressive with my fucking hands because I'm going to my face. So many time lapses of them working on the models, and you see these almost like ghost-like figures working back and forth like this as they move,
yeah.
Exactly, central character moves on. It's just beautiful, and it's I mean, all, as you say, all animation is an art form. All of it is
Yes.
a craft that requires a lot of work. But damn, Leica are good at what they do.
Yeah.
And just the like, you think of stop motion and you think of everything as being very small, but then you see pictures of like the giant skeleton in that.
Just
Yeah, it's huge.
hands.
It's huge.
And it's absolutely huge. And
How big is it,
yeah,
Tim?
the
Show us
scale
again with
of
your
it,
hands. Show us again with your hands.
Just it's huge. It's just
Yeah.
massive.
Yeah, I can't remember how big it is off the top of my head, but I think it was something like 25 foot or 30 foot or something like that.
Yeah,
it was huge.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to get that smooth animation on something that big is just mind blowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just incredible, and yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jurassic Park. I mean, the industry, the stop motion, go motion industry, which was, let's face it, the major VFX industry for cinema, along with matte paintings and that sort of compositor work. When Jurassic Park came along, much because they were in fact incorrect about these things, everyone assumed, bang, CGI. Everything has to be CGI now. This is the old industry. It takes too long. It's too expensive, etc. And it's like, it's not necessarily that it obviously isn't appropriate for everything, but it then becomes this niche where it is like you could tell some very unique and really interesting stories. It doesn't have to be for everything, but the things you can do with it is so the potential is just there to just be amazing, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm eating my moustache right now. It's really annoying.
Yeah, for those of you who have never seen Matt's face before, he has quite a significant moustache and beard. So it's like, yeah, it's supposed to look kind of like what John has drawn at the bottom there, but
I've got this hair sticking out. That ain't mine.
Is that not the hair from your moustache, like tucked up?
Wrapped round.
I just want to get like a Sharpie and draw your facial hair on your bandages.
Can we ask your wife to come in and draw on your face, please?
Paint me like one of your French girls, Em. No, sorry. My wife's name is Em. That will be no doubt confusing.
Yeah.
And my fiance's name is Emma. So
yeah.
I mean, both excellent names, to be fair.
All the best people are called Emma. Em. Or Tim.
Or Tim. Speaking of Tim, a request here from Vincent Gain. They want to give Tim a belly rub. Tim, you mentioned before we went live, you've actually got quite a thicket going on. Can you show that off for us?
Chest hair kind of going on. You can't really see.
Are you sure you're not Austin Powers?
I mean, I'm not sure that Austin Powers isn't a werewolf. Is the thing there.
Yeah, baby.
Hairy like animal.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Yeah. And that's a thing I'll never get out of my brain now is belly rubbing Tim. Just give him a belly.
You look a bit Miyagi.
I'm open to it.
Yeah, nice.
Should we?
The comments have got put in here.
Yeah, should we have a? I was gonna say, should we have a? Because I mean, we're all gonna have a lot to say about this director, so I feel like we don't want to get too lost.
Should we dive in? Cool. Yeah. So,
yes.
As I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to be discussing the filmography as a director of Guillermo del Toro, somebody who's been featured on the show before, who I picked to direct my Thing prequel, for example.
That implies he's been on the show.
I wish.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's always welcome.
This is true.
Guillermo, if you are watching, you're welcome to come on.
Yeah.
If you need Shape of Water 2, you know.
If you need a reference, Em is happy to provide one. We've been we haven't been anything other than just here.
So, what was your thought process behind picking Del Toro for us to discuss on this live stream?
I mean,
apart from I really like Guillermo del Toro.
That's kind of it, really. I think he's awesome, and I think his movies are always really interesting. I like the fact that he tries all these different kind of themes that he's kind of gone in. He's looked at but he's kind of done fantasy. He's done like ghost stories. He's done big mecha robot stories. You know, he he's the sort of director that I kind of feel like you can't really pigeonhole. That he has done so many different things, and yet every single movie that he's done is still a Del Toro movie. I mean, more so than others, definitely, but there's definitely something about him that I just find so fascinating. And then when I realized that you hadn't covered him before, it was literally like he was my only choice. When you came to me and you said something along the lines of, please come on our live stream, we desperately want you, we'll give you loads of money, although, you know, the check hasn't arrived yet, by the way. You know, all of that begging and pleading and all of that stuff. And that's why when you did that, I was like, it has to be Del Toro. There's no one else. And then it just kind of happens to be that this is, you know, tomorrow's Halloween and we're all dressed up really randomly, and some of us more random than others, let's be fair, because I look pretty normal. So, well, as normal as I can possibly look. So yeah, it all kind of goes in quite nicely, because he's quite well known for the kind of slightly spookier, macabre, not horror, because he never really kind of goes into horror, but definitely more ghostly kind of stories and all of that yeah, it just kind of seems to fit for this particular season. And I mean, I've watched quite a few of his movies recently, the ones that I hadn't seen before, and all of them I would absolutely recommend to watch at Halloween, because I mean, some of them are a little bit scarier than others, but mostly they just bring out so many emotions in me, you know, just joy and sadness and fear and all of those things that you want to experience when you go and see a movie. Del Toro delivers that every single time, and that's why I love him, and that's why I wanted to talk about him.
Yeah, that's a good shout. What I'm doing there? I was like, that's a good shout. I mean, I would agree again entirely. I think Del Toro is one of the very
Thanks.
Oh no, he's one of those people who is a very quickly became a master of his craft. His craft being put some shit in jars and film it, because every film shit in jars. But yeah, it's you're right. It's not what one would expect in terms of visceral gore. There's always a very not antiquated, but definitely something that's missing from cinema for a long time. This sort of gothic romance. There's always a beautiful tragedy to all of it. The sense that you have monsters, and they're not the obvious way of doing it. So you have ghosts, but they're your allies in a way. They're not adversaries to be terrified of. There are hideous creatures and beasts, but they're in fact our saviors, heroes, and lovers. And you have so many different versions of things, and taking, you know, an established franchise in a different direction, preconception in a different direction, and he's grown so quickly to be so clever and so visually appealing in what he does that literally it's one of those individuals where you hear the name and go, yeah, I'll watch it, whatever it is, whatever the project is.
Exactly.
And for example, he's got obviously a new one out, I think the end of the year. I think it's what it's scheduled. And Pinocchio. And Pinocchio, I don't give too many shits about, except the recent Italian Pinocchio. I really loved that version. It was fantastic with Roberto Benigni in it. So I'm like, oh, Netflix production of Pinocchio, great. All right. And it's like Del Toro is doing it. I'm like, oh, okay. Now I'm very much invested. Now I actually care. Now I want to see what he will do with it. What weird shit will he put in a jar in this instance?
I mean, that's kind of the one thing that really still bums me out about not Del Toro himself, but about the situation that he was put in at the time is I still lament that we will never see Del Toro's Hobbit movies.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would have adored, and I know that he executively produced and all of that gubbins, and I believe he wrote maybe one or some of those movies. I don't remember exactly.
I think he was credited because he was part of the creative process and all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure how involved he actually was.
But how incredible! I mean, those Hobbit movies, I'm not a huge fan. I think they're fine. They're not Lord of the Rings, but they're fine. But how incredible would it have been to see a Del Toro even a Del Toro Hobbit movie. I just want one. I don't care about like multiples. Just give me one, because I think that would have been astonishing. You know, the stuff that he puts in, his kind of creative process, his the kind of monsters that come out of his brain are just so beautifully created and thought out. And you know, there's so much mythology behind them, and to see something like that in a Hobbit movie would have just blown my mind. But then I suppose we got Peter Jackson ones, and they were fine. But oh god, I so desperately, don't even get me started on Hellboy 3. Let's not go there, because otherwise this will be 2.5 hours of me lamenting that we never got a Hellboy 3.
We do that.
We did an episode on that, so
I know.
that was a sequel we wanted to see. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Good little note here from Meatball Guy 1. Guillermo del Toro manages to turn donkey transformation into his own version. Oh, really scary Pinocchio. I'm not sure I'm ready.
There's some fucked up shit in Pinocchio, at least in the Disney version.
Yeah.
Like, that's a quietly
Pinocchio
terrifying film.
is all fucked up shit from start to end. As the Italian version has, oh, little boy, come here. What do you want? We're going to hang you now. Why? It doesn't matter. And because he's wooden, you can't hang him. It's like, oh, it's a fun game. It's the fox and the cat. And it's like, this is a messed up, like, obviously, Italian version of Grimm's fairy tale something. It's like, it has really dark, horrible, disgusting origins. Extremely good. So I wouldn't be surprised if he really delves into that. I guess the monster is Pinocchio in a way, because he's a little bastard. He's an upstart little shit. So, yeah, interesting. Oh, by the way, I agree. I think we were robbed of a Del Toro Hobbit. Sorry. I don't like the Hobbit films. I think they are, in essence, sometimes really quite interesting because of the the dwarf angle of things and all the appendices and blah blah blah. But again, knowing what we could have had, even if it wasn't necessarily brilliant, I think Del Toro would have made something so unique.
Yeah.
It would have been a piece of cinema, basically. So yeah.
Yeah. You need to stop agreeing with me. This is
Okay.
is not right.
All right. Okay. Fine. To be fair, we'll get to the bracket. I'll be like, "Are you out of your goddamn mind? Are you out of your mind?"
This is where the anger and the heat tends to come in on these episodes.
Yes.
And I'll go, yeah, I don't particularly like that one. And everybody goes, what the fuck, Jack? What the fuck are you thinking? Are you mad?
Yeah.
And we'll get into that and how the deciding vote ends up, and it can get pretty tense. So yeah, let's get into it. As always, John Scarrett has designed a wonderful little bracket for us of all of Guillermo del Toro's work as a director, and here is that lovely little bracket.
Yes.
Isn't it delightful?
Nice.
Matt, I'll pass over control to you as the master of brackets.
Thank you. Do you know what's really awful?
Love that Metallica song.
Oh yeah, don't you start, Tim. Don't you start.
My wig has slipped down to my nose, and it's so ticklish and so itchy. I'm like, what the fuck? It's like
Again,
the wig.
are you sure that's not your mustache?
The wig and the mustache want to be as one. Anyway, right. So the film's off. So we have a fairly symmetrical bracket this time, which is quite nice. We have a lot of these ones which are really lopsided. This one's quite neat. I've wargamed this myself, and I think it's going to be very interesting. I think it's going to be the thing where we end up going, well, they're all good, but at the same time, we'll end up saying it'll be personal preference, I think, more than else. But let's have a look at it. So the exterior. Why aren't you working? There we go. Great. It's really hard to do this with gloves on. We have Chronos and Crimson Peak. We'll get into more details about these things, obviously, very soon. Mm-hmm. Hellboy 2, The Golden Army versus Pacific Rim. On the other side, we have Mimic versus Blade 2. And then The Devil's Backbone, we're up against whichever one of those wins. The Shape of Water versus Hellboy 1. Mm-hmm. And over here, whichever one wins out of Chronos and Crimson Peak goes up against Pan's Labyrinth, which is going to be... I mean, I don't really envy any of these films having to be gone into it, because I think there's so much personal attachment to the projects, to the characters, to the scenario, to even just like, just to hark back to something sort of Emily to earlier, there are so many really beautiful images and shots and ideas present in all of these. You could say, yeah, this one's the better film, but there's this one moment I fucking love. I really want to pick it for that reason. So I think this is going to be surprisingly challenging.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah. I think it's going to be tough. We've actually got a prediction. So, viewers, if you do want to get your predictions in, drop a message in the chat. Let us know. We've got a prediction from Andy here: Pan's Labyrinth versus Hellboy for the final, and Richard as well, also saying Pan's Labyrinth versus Hellboy.
Interesting.
I think they might be the obvious choices. They're like two of the most mainstreamy kind of ones, I'd say. But I know we have a couple of diehard Del Toro fans in this quad of us. So
yes,
I mean, I'm very intrigued. I'm very intrigued to see where we go. And of course, I'll be on the stats for Rotten Tomatoes, box office, all that kind of stuff as we go through. And as we always do, we will delve into each one. The first time we talk about it, we'll talk about it extensively, and then we'll kind of go through, whip through once we've kind of discussed each film.
Yes.
Another prediction here from Vincent Gain: Pan's Labyrinth versus Devil's Backbone in the final. Very
Hispanic
interesting.
Core showdown.
Shaking her head and nodding her head.
No, I don't want to give anything away. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a reasonably good prediction, but we shall see.
Yeah, we'll find out.
That's the level of quality is so high. Like sometimes we have a round where it's like a lot of sorting the wheat from the chaff, but like Del Toro basically doesn't miss.
No,
pretty much. Yeah.
Him and Villeneuve and a few people, like maybe Kubrick. It's like everything is good. It's like, you mean even the early stuff? It's like, yeah, even the early stuff. It's like, so he was always good. It's like
the early stuff of Del Toro is absolutely fantastic. If you consider the fact that this, you know, if you look at something like Chronos, and I know we're going to talk about it in a bit more detail, but holy shit, that is a phenomenal debut.
And they're nearly 30 years old. Like,
it's just so good.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. I'm going to zoom back in. My gloved hand, my invisible flesh underneath.
So before we get stuck into it, has everyone seen every single one of these films?
Yes.
Okay. I have as well. Hooray!
Oh wow, shit! This is a rarity.
Usually, I'm the one that's left out because I'm, haven't seen some of the older stuff or haven't seen some of the more obscure stuff. But I went out of my way to actually make sure I've seen all these.
Yeah.
There's not that many of them, so it's kind of hard to excuse it. So we have all seen all of them, which is good.
But that doesn't mean it might not go to the audience because if those are regular.
Oh no, not necessarily at all. Yeah.
When there's three of us, there's a guaranteed rock paper scissors. Like it's definitely going to end with a certain way. Sort of thing, but then when there's sometimes four of us, like or more accurately, when there's three of us and we haven't seen all of them, it's like, well, I can't comment. We'll throw to the viewers, not you guys on YouTube watching later. Hello, be watching live now, and they can obviously give us their votes, and they can influence how we affect this bracket, as has happened in the past. With four people, you can have a really, really obviously tight, close, like 3-1 sort of situation, or a complete 4. Everyone's absolutely happy with it. But a tie is very possible. So we may be bouncing to you people watching now.
Have your proverbial fingers on buzzers ready to go, viewers, because I was saying this to Em earlier on when we were doing sort of cameras and mic checks and stuff. With the four of us now, with the extra guest being on, and like you said, Matt, make it an even number of people. This could get pretty tricky pretty quickly.
Can you not do what they do on Strictly Come Dancing and give someone the casting vote? Like me, for example.
That's a very...
I'm specifically asking for me.
I have suggested that we give the guest the casting vote in the past.
Thank you.
I'm going to take this time to officially disagree with them.
We like having the viewers involved as well. So
exactly.
Cool. That's cool. Cool. Yeah.
You say that now. You won't be saying that in 15 minutes time. your favorite one is kicked out, and we're all like, "Oh, sorry."
I mean, look, hell hath no fury like Evelyn Carnahan scorned. So
fair.
I fought Imhotep for Pete's sake.
True. And won many times.
Is that like Christ died for your sins? Like I fought Imhotep for you guys.
See, my brain went to Rushmore, and I saved Latin. I fought Imhotep.
Oh dear.
So Chronos versus Crimson Peak, bit of a weird opener.
Very weird
Because I
opener.
think these ones are very divisive, and I think people have very strong opinions about both, but they're also very, very underviewed.
Yeah, and not the most recent, but one of the most recent versus his first, which is a very interesting dichotomy there. So let's start with Chronos from 1993, just over an hour and a half long, has a 91% on the tomatometer from the critics, and a slightly lower, and get used to this theme, viewers and fellow hosts, very high on the critic score, slightly lower on the user score, because he makes artsy movies that some people don't like. So therefore, user scores are going to be slightly lower. Unsurprisingly, a lot of these scores are very, very high. And I know we've tackled that with Spielberg before. We did that a bit with Fincher. But yeah, get ready for stuff in the 90+% for a few of these movies. And it's going to be difficult. But yes, as I said, 91% for the critic score, 69% for the user score. Interesting stuff.
Did you want to lead us your experience of Chronos and why you think it should go through, basically?
Okay. Sorry, I had to take the glasses off because they were starting to irritate me a little bit. I can still see, by the way.
I feel your pain. My face is pure irritation. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's. I'm not used to wearing glasses, so it was just starting to get on my nerves a little bit. Actually, probably should put them back on because otherwise the costume doesn't make much sense without them.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
I'm not wearing my mask.
Yeah, it's all good.
I'll put it back
sorry,
on.
I had no idea. I thought you were still in the game. This is news to me. Right, so yeah, Chronos. It's a movie that I only saw quite recently, actually. I did a bit of a binge buy of a couple of Del Toro's earlier works because I realised I'd never seen Chronos and I'd never seen The Devil's Backbone. And I found them online, reasonably priced. Tell you what, the version of Chronos that I got, I bought it on DVD, and it came up as secondhand, and I was like, oh, cool, I don't mind buying a secondhand DVD because they're normally really good value. And it came, and obviously the person who'd got rid of it had never seen it because it was still in its wrapping, in this kind of beautiful, presentation sleeve and all of that. And I was just made me a little bit sad, actually, that the person who'd obviously donated or sent this off to Music Magpie or whatever, insert name of, generic DVD.
We're not the BBC. You don't need to say.
Okay, just check it. I don't know.
We're sponsored by another very well-known second-hand DVD eBay shop.
If you need some money, send your stuff to Music Magpie.
Exactly. You get £1 for a giant box of stuff.
Yeah, we guarantee to give you less than a penny for your DVD. But anyway, so it was like £2 or something for this version of Chronos, and it was completely brand new. So it made me a bit sad because obviously the person had never seen it and they'd obviously given it away. And I didn't really know what to expect from it. I knew nothing about it. All I knew was it was his directorial debut. And honestly, I just thought, it's probably going to be a bit honky, isn't it? Because it's directorial debuts do tend to be, probably not the greatest things that a director's ever done. But I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed it. Obviously, I watched it subtitled because I don't speak Spanish. So, a lot of Del Toro's earlier work, you either have to know Spanish or you have to watch it subtitled. And I know that Del Toro was never a huge fan of the subtitled work that was done on his earlier stuff. But I've lost my train of thought as to where I was going to go. This happens sometimes. But I actually really liked the kind of spin on the classic vampire tale.
Yes. Yeah.
What will you do for immortality, and how far will you go for that immortality, and what does it cost? And I found it incredibly thoughtful, considering there are so many vampire movies in the world. This kind of really stands out as something very unique. It's not your traditional, guy with, flowing black cape and fangs and all of that sort of stuff. It's structured in such a way that it asks questions of what will a person do, to and also the power of addiction as well, and how vampirism can be addictive. And I can't remember the lead character's name. It escapes me at the moment, but with the lead character, pardon?
Is it Gree?
Jesus Gree, yeah.
Yes. And how he can't actually stop.
Yeah.
With this particular device, and it attaches itself to you, and it essentially, it's sort of semi poisoning you, semi kind of granting you this immortality. And I just found it so fascinating, and I was a bit like, why did I not watch this sooner? Why has it taken me so long? Being a fan of Del Toro for so long, why has it taken me so long to watch this? Because this is very indicative of what he will end up doing. And he doesn't really, he does go to like a more traditional vampire tale.
Yeah.
We were talking about Blade 2. But it just, I don't think there's anything else like this. I mean, I'm sure you guys will be able to tell me if there is something very similar that out there that's kind of like this, but I found it very interesting.
No, Chronos is a really, as you say, it subverts a genre, and it subverts expectations. I mean, as you say, there's this old is he antique dealer? Yes, I think it is. And he's got this device, this clockwork device from hundreds of years ago, and it just attaches itself to him. But then, as you say, it's that sort of parasitic relationship where he becomes more virile and younger, and it's that classic sort of transformation. And it's tragic and beautiful, but again, Del Toro has a way of putting people that you would not expect front and center. And the fact that in his first film, the story's about an old man, that's not really something you see. Is he like, oh, who's the lead? A 25-year-old white dude, usually named Jack.
How rude.
It's true. But yes, especially in video games. But
yeah.
To focus on an older person, obviously this the sucker of youth. It's a very beyond his years thing to do for a young director. And as you say, I think a lot of people think, oh, it's a first film, it's a debut, it's going to be hokey, it's going to be pony in places, it's not going to work for a lot of the parts. But the truth is, as you said, you can see the seeds of what will be. You can see what he is working towards, and the kind of stories he gravitates towards, and the kind of things he's doing. So, yeah, Chronos is very underrated because I think it might be one of the most underseen ones on this list. From not only, the uninitiated Del Toro's thinking, oh, I know the Pacific Rim movie, I've heard of that in the cinema, but also for people who love Del Toro because, as you say, it's very easy to get a hold of, and it's like 90 minutes long, whatever it is. It's a short film, but he does so much in that space. It's great. It's great.
I think it shows off like a couple of things that Del Toro is really good at, or that he returns to a lot of the time. And one's kind of a film making process thing, and the other's like thematic. The thematic thing is that the monsters are not who you expect them to be.
Yeah.
And that really the people that are, or the creatures that we traditionally consider monsters, we should have more sympathy for, and the things that are actually monsters are the people who are amongst us already. And I think his strongest films tend to, in some way, touch on that theme. I think it also shows off a thing, which is he's so good at working within his given budget. like he's such a master of integrating special effects and amazing production design and knowing when to make a thing a physical object and knowing when to make it a CGI creation or whatever. And Chronos still looks really good because he doesn't go for broke. Like, even though, like we say, it's like 30 years old, like, and it's a fantasy, a horror story, like, because it's so subtle, it still feels relatively fresh. Like, he's not trying to do more than he's capable with of the budget. And I think that you can follow that all the way through his career of just like, he uses money in such a smart way. And it means that his films continue to look amazing because he's not trying to like push the envelope in terms of what he's capable of and like pushing, CGI artists, to make something that they really don't have the time or the capacity to do, because so much of it's done with physical stuff and he's very clever about how he deploys it. It means that his films just continue to look fantastic. I think
I would agree with that. Yeah.
It's such a fascinating debut, and I think it really points to so many of the places that he would end up going with his career.
Yeah. No, again, goddamn agreeing with everybody. I agree. Which is why we're going to talk about Crimson Peak, which is a really tricky one because I like a lot about this movie, but there are elements that don't sit right. So Crimson Peak, for those who don't know, is a classic gothic horror in that it's about, it's a haunted house and a creepy relationship between these siblings, and a new, wife comes in, very Daphne du Maurier kind of shit going on there. And, she uncovers the tale of the house and the history and so on and so forth. And it's a mystery, but it's also spooky and upsetting and unsettling. And it's very well made. It's incredibly well. The production design is amazing. The direction is obviously really good. The acting is very solid. There are some interesting choices in the casting. I'm looking at you, Charlie Hunnam. I don't dislike Charlie Hunnam. I dislike him in certain roles, but he's fantastic in others. But I'm like, oh yeah, Charlie Hunnam's in this.
Yeah. Does kind of stand out like a sore thumb a bit, doesn't he?
Yeah, but that's fine. So there's a lot to like about Crimson Peak, but again, much like, similarly to Chronos, this came out, I think it was his first film so it's 22 years after Chronos, it's 2 years after Pacific Rim, hence the Charlie Hunnam. And I don't know really if it found its audience. I know there's definitely an audience for it. I know people love this movie. But you've had such big bombastic stuff, and to take not necessarily a step backwards, because I think this is still big and bombastic in its own way, but to take a step to something a little more subtle, a little softer, then obviously, giant stompy mechs. Didn't chime with people. It's one of the things people I think would mind. I wouldn't be surprised if people revisit at some point and say, actually, I really like this. But for me, there are moments that, I mean, for example, we're talking about the budget and the CGI and things, and I agree with you, Tim. He definitely knows. He has a feel for how the industry is going, and if he doesn't, he'll tell you. Because in the commentary for Blade 2 on the DVD, he's like, there are 3 visual effects shots that he fucking hates, and he points out, it's like, that one, it looks so fake, I hate it, I hate it. Oh, it looks so rubbery and bendy. Oh, it's awful. And it's like, I get it. I any director going back to his work rather than going, oh yes, this is perfect. Every shot is exactly as I wanted it to be. And now I'm German. But the point is that, it's the idea that, that kind of arrogance, he has that thing. He wants to constantly better himself, constantly tell a new story, constantly different places. And I love that because it drives him. But Crimson Peak, there are moments where there's beautiful practical effects. And they're slathered with just a little too much CGI, to the point I thought one thing was a pure CGI shot, and then behind the scenes it's Doug Jones. And you're like, oh, I didn't realize that. It looks a bit too, for lack of a better word, fake, and that's a bit disappointing. So what about you guys?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, in the sense that obviously the characters are supposed to be ghosts.
Yes.
not the main characters, but it's a ghost story. But yeah, it's supposed to be like a gothic romantic kind of ghost story, but it's not really a story about ghosts. It's more a story about this particular character, the Mia Wasikowska character, and about her kind of coming into a kind of womanhood in a way, and obviously that the pressures that are put on her as a woman, and I kind of really like where Del Toro was going with Crimson Peak. I mean, I'll be completely honest. The fact that Tom Hiddleston is this sells it to me immediately. Because I love him. And then you've got Jessica Chastain as well. And Jessica Chastain, she's a sort of actress where you kind of feel like if she's in a movie, it's going to be good because Jessica Chastain. I think she kills it. You excuse the pun. I think she kills it in this movie. She is so incredible. And it's a bit of a shame for Mia Wasikowska, really, because when you're partnered against Jessica Chastain, you're like, sorry, love, you've got no chance. But
and Jessica Chastain gets to go a lot bigger in this movie than
she does,
Mia Wasikowska does. Like
I mean, it's a really incredible performance from her. But I think because it is centered around a ghost story about the story of this particular house. I am such a huge fan of practical effects, and it's something that I talk about on my podcast all the time. And it's one of the reasons why I love Del Toro so much, because he focuses so primarily on his practical effects. And I remember when I first saw Crimson Peak, I also assumed that the ghost was CGI, and it wasn't until I actually looked into Crimson Peak a bit more that I realized that the legendary Doug Jones, who I love that man.
He'll come up a few times in this.
He's constantly. I mean, the fact that Del Toro continues to work with him, that they've created so many wonderful characters together. I think that Doug Jones is so incredibly underrated. A lot of people don't know who he is. I mean, I'll always remember him as the lead gentleman in Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode, which is just the way that he like moves his fingers, and he'll just like it's almost like a mechanical kind of movement to him. I think he's phenomenal. But to kind of find out that that he was actually doing a practical performance for I believe he's the ghost of the mother, I believe.
Yes. In Red,
and you wouldn't think it was practical. And to me, I kind of feel like that maybe takes away from the movie a little bit, because if you don't think it's practical, then to me, it kind of takes something away from it. And I don't want to take anything away from Crimson Peak, because to look at it, it's got some stunning cinematography. When you've got the red clay coming through the floor, I mean, really eerie and with like this weird kind of beauty with like the roof off the house and all of these leaves kind of coming into this house. I mean, it's an absolutely phenomenal set piece, that house. And it just feels a little bit incomplete in a way. And that, and I kind of feel really bad saying that, because I do love Crimson Peak a lot. But it's really difficult, because if you're comparing it to other works of Del Toro, which inevitably we are going to do.
You're going to have to.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting ideas in Crimson Peak, but I don't quite think it kind of hits the mark on those ideas every single time. But it's like, for the sum of its parts, the parts of its sum, in a way, you know what I mean? There's some really outstanding stuff going on in Crimson Peak that a lot of people didn't know, that a lot of people have kind of passed, because Crimson Peak didn't do very well, and a lot of Del Toro's stuff didn't do incredibly well at the box office, which obviously I think Jack's going to probably go through. But there's an interesting story in Crimson Peak, but it doesn't quite always deliver for me.
I think you hit the nail on the head, where it's like, it's not quite the sum of its parts. Like, there's really interesting elements in it, and in a way it feels like Del Toro revisiting some of his earlier stuff, like the design of some of the ghosts. Without getting into too many spoilers, there's a lot of similarities between some of the ghosts and the ghosts in The Devil's Backbone, for example.
Yes, very
just in
much
how
so.
they're visualized and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And I think it's the closest Del Toro gets to being self-indulgent, I think.
Yeah.
Because you can tell he's having just so much fun with this huge practical set of the house, and the, like you say, the red clay coming in everywhere, and the hole in the roof with the snow coming in and stuff like that. And there's so much like for the production design nerd element of him. He's having so much fun shooting that stuff, but I think it gets away from the storytelling at the end of the day. Hang on, I'm going to sneeze.
Tim is allergic to
mask?
criticizing Del Toro.
There we go. Yeah.
Surely it should have been a little ahoo, not a sneeze.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of great elements in it. I think there's some really good performances in it, but it doesn't quite it doesn't all gel together in the way that some of his other films do, I think.
We're going to have to get better at summarizing these, because I realized how long we spent on the first vote. This will be great.
Jack,
sorry about
do you
that.
want to give us the numbers and your feelings, and then we'll get to the vote?
Certainly, yeah. I'm not a big Crimson Peak fan. I'll put that out there right now. It's one of my least favorite of Del Toro's offerings. I'm not a huge fan of the whole gothic ghosty thing. That's just totally not my vibe. What I think something you touched on earlier, Em, is the cinematography is spectacular, and somebody who will come up a couple of times later on as well is Dan Laosen, who is the cinematographer who worked on Shape of Water, Mimic, and Crimson Peak, which I think are three of Del Toro's, and that's saying something, three of his most visually interesting movies, and he has a career of incredibly visually interesting movies, basically, exclusively. And Laosen is fantastic at getting these really interesting, beautiful shots and working with, like we said, the practical side of things. And something, we kind of touched on CGI in kind of a negative way, but I think a way that Del Toro works with his visual effects teams in a brilliant way to kind of blend the practical and the digital, because there's so many elements you don't even realize are digital, countering the ghosts, basically, that you thought were digital but are actually practical. Like how, we'll get onto it, Pan's the fawn's leg in Pan's Labyrinth, the way it bends backwards is actually there's a little green screen cloth there and stuff, and you don't realize, there's a little bit of digital trickery going on to actually make him look like this. But it's Doug Jones again. It's a big gangly guy in a big suit wibbling about and wobbling about and stuff. So you get this brilliant element of the practical and this little tweaking and just little extra bits with the digital. And I think that's something Crimson Peak doesn't particularly nail for me. Like you said, I think a lot of the visual effects work, but they don't blow me away like some of the other stuff we're going to be talking about later on. To get into the stats, 72% on the critical side of things, so considerably lower, as you said, than Chronos, and 55% on the audience side of things. And to touch on, we're going to talk about quite a few movies that didn't make much money. Again, another theme of Del Toro's career, unfortunately, for some of these movies. A budget of 55 million for Crimson Peak and made just under 75 million. And in 2015, that is not what you want to hear from a budget and a box office combination.
A remarkably small budget, really, for like having just come off the back.
I mean, he has the habit of doing that. Yeah. He works, like you said, he makes the most of his money when he does. Yeah. Which we'll certainly touch on in a moment.
So, should we get to the vote?
Certainly. I'm up first, and if you guys are joining us for the first time, I'll vote first, and the next time round, Tim will vote first, and then we'll go in that order. Then Em will vote first, then we go through and then Matt will vote first. Keeps it fresh, keeps it interesting. So Matt isn't always the deciding vote, and there's not always the pressure there, and I'm not always the first person. All that kind of stuff. And if I haven't kind of clearly already spelled it out, Chronos, probably the easiest pick in this tournament for me. Tim, how about you?
I think a little harder for me, but I will go with Chronos as well.
Okay, so I I feel like as much as I love the visuals in Crimson Peak, and I really, really do, I kind of feel like I have to go for Chronos as well.
Nothing wrong with that. I'm gonna put the last nail in this coffin. I think for the visuals, I could go for Crimson Peak, but Chronos is just so underrated and deserves to go. I mean, it's a moot point. It's going to go up against Pan's Labyrinth, but Chronos
Yeah,
deserves to
I
get off
know.
the starting block. So here we go.
Yeah.
And boop.
Ta-da!
one.
Chronos on to the next round.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Right. Over to the other side. Ooh. The big studio ones. Okay.
yeah. So Blade
Mimic
2,
and Blade
funnily enough, something we've touched on before in this show because I fixed Blade 3 in the past. As we already know, it is criminally underrated on Rotten Tomatoes as well. It is a recurring joke at this point on our show.
That and the Mummy.
Is it better? Is it higher or lower?
Yes to the
than
Mummy.
Blade
Yes.
2? And the Mummy. Yeah, absolutely. 57% for 2002's Blade 2, which is bollocks.
Oh my god!
And a slightly higher score on the audience, which is 68%, and it is going up against Mimic, which is from 1997 with a 64% on the critic score and a 37, the lowest on the audience score side of things. I believe, just quick scanning, I think that is the lowest audience score of any of these movies. So, yeah. Interesting.
So,
let's start with Blade 2, shall we?
Actually, before we get into it, Del Toro was famously unhappy with Mimic when it came out, and there was a lot of studio interference.
Yes.
He did actually have a director's cut come out.
Yes.
I think for the Blu-ray release.
I have it on Blu-ray. Yeah.
I was going to say, I imagine Matt has seen the director's cut. Have any of the rest of us seen the director's cut?
Yeah, I've only seen the director's cut. I've not seen the actual.
Me too. I have only seen the director's cut as well. Same. Yeah.
So I've only seen the original cut.
So,
interesting. Anyway,
for the purposes of this, I guess we just have to go with the versions we've seen.
Yes.
Yeah, but in truth,
yeah.
I think this is going to be actually. I mean, Jack talked about one of the more clean-cut ones earlier with Chronos and Crimson Peak. I think this is the cleanest one because you've got.
This is the other one I was thinking of.
Yeah, you've got Mimic, which is a really troubled production. It's the classic. This is a very talented director. Let's give him a budget and, I don't know, some interfering studio producers. Oh, fantastic! And you say he nearly disowned the film. Well, he tried to on multiple occasions. Director's cut comes out with some tweaks and changes, but you can only do so much with what the production was at the time. It's an interesting story. It's very kind of grounded for him, and quite straightforward in its execution. Because again, I think it's like a lot of pressuring, a lot of hammering, a lot of pushing into a sort of a final mold he doesn't necessarily want. But I still think there's a lot of positives to Mimic. I think it still has some decent structural design. It's got great performances still. It just happens to be trapped in this really a troubled film. Blade 2 is amazing. I love Blade 2. I think Blade 2 is...
We talked about this on the show before. We all love Blade 2. Blade 2.
It's better than Blade 1 for me. The design is great. The lore, the cast he brings in, the visuals, the story. It's just magnificent. So, what's your take on these two?
Okay, so first of all, completely agree on Blade 2. Blade 2 is the superior Blade movie. I adore Blade 2. I love the creature design in Blade 2. I mean, I'm always a huge fan of creature design. And again, that's why I love Del Toro, because I love creature design too. I don't know if any of you have seen the TV show that Del Toro, because obviously he wrote the book as well. He executively produced The Strain.
Yes.
The Strain, yeah.
Which so similar in the design for the vampires in The Strain.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, we're not talking about The Strain. I mean, that's a completely different kettle of fish. But I absolutely love Blade 2. I think that it's so incredibly underrated, especially in the the comic book genre. People don't tend to kind of look at the Blade movies, and if they do,
No.
they tend to look at that first Blade movie, because that first Blade movie obviously was it's kind of seen as the first really good Marvel comic book movie. It came out in 1998, so it predates X-Men. X-Men is obviously kind of seen as the one that really kind of started it, because Blade was R-rated or 18-rated or whatever you want to call it. But Blade 2 kind of took that character in a bit of a different direction. And I think that just the fight choreography and everything about Blade 2, I can't tell you how much I love Blade 2. It's just a really great kind of package of this movie, this character. I'm always quite interested when a director comes in, especially a director like Del Toro comes in to do a sequel to a movie that he had no involvement in the first movie. But I kind of find that he obviously still puts his unique Del Toro spin on Blade 2. I mean, that is kind of mostly with the creature design. There's not much else that kind of I don't think that Del Toro normally kind of works with. We were talking about the monsters aren't always the monster kind of thing, and that is kind of a theme in Blade 2. The fact that Blade is part vampire and all of that sort of thing, and technically the vampires are the bad guys, but he's the good guy. But Del Toro obviously is taking this franchise from another filmmaker. I don't know who did the first Blade movie, I'll be honest, I don't know off the top of my head, but that's not something that he tends to do, and it's not something that he's done since, because the sequel that he then did, I'm talking about Hellboy 2, he obviously did the first Hellboy movie. And although obviously he was quite constrained on the first Hellboy movie, he really got to kind of flourish with the second one. So yeah, I find Blade 2 quite an interesting concept as a Del Toro movie, in a sense that it is very different to everything else, just because it's a sequel to an existing movie. Mimic, again, is only one that I saw quite recently, and I saw the director's cut because that was the only one that was available. So I'm interested to actually see the theatrical, because I'd like to see how different they are. I know that from reading up that Del Toro did not like the theatrical version, and that the director's cut is more in line with his original vision. I got distinct shades of Alien from Mimic. I really love the creature design in Mimic. The fact that the creature looks like a man. And again, it's kind of going into this theme of monsters, because it looks like a man when you first look, and then it turns out to not be a man. Can we do spoilers? Can we?
For this?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Mimic,
Well, yeah, it turns out
Mimic is
like
25 years old. Like, you
True,
can definitely spoil it.
And it's basically like the monster cockroaches, but that can essentially mimic themselves, by forming this thing. It's a really interesting movie, but I feel like you've already alluded to, I feel like this round is this is probably the easiest one for me to kind of choose between.
Same.
I don't know if I've given the game away.
No, I think that's fine. It's good to have this discussion.
I think most people would know, knowing us, would know what our inclination was going into this round.
As Andy puts here, Blade 2, next bracket. Pretty much.
I having not seen Mimic in a long while, like I saw it on TV for the first time when I saw it, and I really enjoyed it at the time. It was before I really knew Del Toro or his work. It was just like something I stumbled across and watched and was like, oh, this is really interesting for like a very late 90s creature feature type film. Weirdly, the second film in 1997 to have a giant cockroach as its antagonist, along with Men in Black.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I think, like you say, the creature design, which is clearly something that Del Toro loves so much, is really interesting. I think it's a fascinating, like, just sort of example of that. But I think it's probably the least Del Toro of all of his movies. Like, there's the least of his personality shining through, and I think that hurts it, because he's a filmmaker with so much personality, and one that clearly we all jibe with extremely. But yeah, I think like you say, Blade 2 is a really interesting one because it's him coming along to something that he didn't have a hand in originally, and you can see, although obviously again it's another one where there's a studio involved and they have, you know, ideas about what they want to do with it. You can see him putting across the elements that he's interested in. I think in the creature design, in stuff like is it the Blood Pack, the team of vampires that are trained to hunt Blade? Like that's such a Del Toro thing, and like the vampire club where you've got people being like flayed alive and stuff like that is very Del Toro.
Yeah.
But
same with like Jared Nomak, the villain played by Luke Goss, because that's where that personality shines through. That's the monster thing comes through, because it's like the monster being the people we expect, the sort of thing we've established with Del Toro's style is corporate vampires, the sort of standard corporate vampires that because in the first film, in the Stephen Norrington Blade original with Dorff, Stephen Dorff playing the Deacon Frost. That's what it is. Yeah.
Yes, the kind of nouveau riche vampire.
Very much so. Yeah, just obnoxious piece of shit. But it worked well for the film. Blade 2 gets in this beautiful sort of disowned son kind of situation where you've got this monstrous tendrilled vampire hunter of vampires, the alternate to Blade in a strange way, carrying this virus that turns these vampires into there's so much going on there that's really more than the sum of its parts. It's more than just a comic movie gory action sequel. It's like it has more heart and more thought process and more going on in it than is initially revealed. And then Trinity comes along and ruins everything.
Luke Goss's character almost becomes like an anti-hero by the end, or kind of an anti-villain, I guess.
You want him to succeed to a degree. Yeah. Tim, you're up first with the vote, I believe.
I mean it's pretty obvious, but I'm always I'm always going to go for the film that's got Cat from Red Dwarf in it as a vampire ninja.
Good show.
So yes, Blade 2 for me.
Em, what about you?
I mean, I feel like I've given the game away, and I think there's a lot of interesting ideas in Mimic, but I do feel like it's probably Del Toro's weakest effort. And it's hard for me to say that because it's, even though it's his weakest, it's still good. Like it's not quite kind of there. And it might just be, like you say, studio interference, all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, it has to be Blade 2.
Yep. My vote's the same, Blade 2. I think Mimic, his hands are tied behind his back. I like Tim. I think I saw this on TV as a teenager, and it was like, oh, cool, a monster movie. That's good. Like Deep Rising kind of thing. This is all right. But Blade 2 really sort of had an impact. Like, this is a good movie. Jack, it's academic now, but for argument's sake,
clean sweep for Blade 2, of course.
Boosh. So that's the outside bracket done. Look how much we've accomplished so far.
We're into the semi-final straight away. We'll be right.
Okay, let's go into some heavy hitting shit here.
Getting some heavy shit.
Chronos versus so we've covered Chronos at great length. We know our opinions on Chronos. Pan's Labyrinth. Pan's Labyrinth 2006, if I remember correctly. And I remember seeing this in
correct,
London.
Matt, yeah, 2006.
Yeah, in the Odeon next to Forbidden Planet, near Shaftesbury Avenue. And the reason I mentioned it specifically there was because they had a relatively new digital projector at that time, and this was when digital, because screens had all been like sort of back projection sort of thing, all been very normal, and you'd lose a fair amount on that transfer. But this was one of the most beautiful films I'd ever seen at that time, in the best format to see it in the cinema, and I was like absolutely astonished with it, blown away. And I knew who Guillermo del Toro was at this point. I was excited by the prospect of the film, surprised it was in Spanish because, ignorant kid. You like, I was 22 years old. You get sort of like, oh, I thought it'd be like Blade 2 for some reason. But the fairy tale element to it, the design, the acting, there's just I think it's fair to say this is an absolute masterpiece, and so iconic for so many people. And also, on top of that, the fact that it's the Spanish Civil War, which we'll come back to obviously later in the bracket, because everyone's just sort of like, it's one of those sort of conflicts that the world kind of forgets happened, and obviously it's because it was simultaneously going on during World War II, and you're like, oh yeah, what was Spain doing? With all the World Wars going, it's like it was fighting itself, and it was brutal, and it was horrifying, and it's rarely talked about. I mean, George Orwell was involved in it. The kind of to give a perspective on how bad it was, and in the heart of this is, a very standard war story about guerrillas and resistance fighters against an oppressive fascist regime, but also one little girl trying to make sense of it all through stories and her sickly mother and an evil stepfather. It's just so fucking good. I'm not giving away how I'm voting. I'm again throwing over to you guys. Any initial any one dare dissent about this? Anyone gonna go? Actually, it's fine.
I have an interesting introduction to Pan's Labyrinth. So this is my first Del Toro film. I think I saw it when it came to DVD. My dad got it, so I would have been 17, 18, something like that. Had no idea what it was. Not a blues clue what the fuck it was. And I had no idea it was in Spanish, no idea who Del Toro is, no idea what that cover means or anything like that. I expected a kid's film. I thought it was like Secret of Nim or Neverending Story, like fucking, I don't know, like
You had
Labyrinth rather than Pan's Labyrinth, but like, oh, it's going to be silly, like magical bollocks, and there's a little fawn and there's a little girl, and they're going to go on magical adventures, and we'll all learn a lesson. Oh, he just caved that guy's face in with a pistol. Oh no! Oh, what's this? Oh, Jesus Christ! It's like suddenly people start dying and horrible shit starts happening, and a child has to deal with abuse and grief. I'm like, oh, well, this is not the film I expected, and I didn't like it at first because I went in with such a clear image in my mind of like, oh yeah, we're just going to sit down, have a lovely family film and whatever, and I was so like genuinely shocked by a couple of moments. I was like, this is not what I was prepared for. And it like shook me up. I've grown to like it much, much more. I've watched it probably 2 or 3 times since then and kind of been like, I know this is really good. I need to rewatch this. And I eventually like got around to rewatching it again. And now I appreciate it. But at the time, I was not ready for that shit.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a weird one for me. And I didn't like it at first, but now realize like, what a kind of masterpiece of storytelling and cinematography it is. And like I mentioned before, Jones's performance, the Pale Man, is such an iconic, incredible thing. You can see him on the bracket there. As soon as somebody does that, you know exactly what they mean. You don't even need to have any special effects. As soon as somebody puts their hands in front of their face and wiggles their fingers, you know something creepy's going on. And I think he's become one of the kind of like definitive creepy monsters of the last, of this century, I'd say probably, in the last like 20 years or so.
Yeah.
And I think it's fantastic, but it was certainly a grower for me, which I think is not true for a lot of people. A lot of people go like, oh, I remember at the time, I looked up the reviews as well, and people were saying like, best film of the year, best film I've ever seen, it's my favorite film ever, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, did I watch the same movie? Like, was I just, what happened in my brain? Like, where did I go wrong? Am I wrong? Are the people wrong? Are the children wrong? Like, yeah, I had that moment. But I've grown to love Pan's Labyrinth. To touch on some stats before I pass it over to you guys as well. As Matt mentioned, it's 2006, a runtime of exactly 2 hours for the theatrical cut. Tomatometer score of 95%. That just might be the highest there, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. And an audience score pretty much matching that of 91%, which again is the highest in all of these. So it is the critics' favorite. It is the audience's favorite. what do you guys think? Like, I think you guys have kind of touched on what a masterpiece it is. I think I'm the only one that even has some sort of vague dissension from what I understand. I think the rest of you guys love it. Is that fair to say?
Sorry.
I will. I mean, I do love it. I will just share a very short story. I went to see it. It was the year I was living in America for university, but I'd come back around New Year's and went to see it with my girlfriend at the time. Really, really enjoyed it. Then went back to America, and it started showing there. And I said to my housemates, "Oh, we should go see this film. It's absolutely fantastic. We should definitely go and see it." And they were like, "Is it a horror film?" And I was like, not really. Like, there's some scary stuff in it, but I wouldn't call it a horror film. Went with them, was like, "Oh, this is so great, such a great film, and they're going to really enjoy it." They were terrified by it. They were like, "What have you brought us to?" And I was like, "Oh, sorry." And then on the journey home, I got out my ballpoint pen while they weren't looking, drew eyes in my hands, and then came up behind one of them and went, "Whoa!" And almost made her wee herself. I love Pan's Labyrinth. You say some more highbrow things than me.
I mean, I can't guarantee that I'm not going to mention anyone weeing themselves. But I have a relationship with this movie. I've covered it on my own podcast. So basically, I've covered quite a few of Del Toro's things. And every time I've covered something, I'm going to mention that I've covered it. So I covered this back in August. So it's quite a recent episode. And it was one of those that I put off for a little while because I don't like to do kind of all of the kind of big favorite movies straight away. I like to kind of spread it all out because, you don't want to blow your load too early, do you? So
we did the same.
So I have a relationship with this movie. This is the first of Del Toro's movies that I saw at the cinema. So I hadn't seen anything at the cinema. I hadn't even seen Hellboy, the first Hellboy at the cinema. Since Pan's Labyrinth, I believe I've seen everything that he's done at the cinema. But yeah, so Pan's Labyrinth was the first movie that I saw at the cinema, and it was one of those where I didn't really know what to expect from it. And I remember just being so completely blown away by it. Not so much. I mean, there's like you've already kind of said, there's so many things in this movie. I knew nothing about the Spanish Civil War before I watched this movie, before I researched this movie. And obviously, again, that's something that's going to come up in The Devil's Backbone, because that's obviously also set against the Civil War.
Yeah.
It's genuinely, for me, and I feel like I'm, again, showing my cards early, this, to me, should have won him Oscars.
Agreed.
This, to me, is his masterpiece.
If I remember at the time, it was controversial that it didn't win any Oscars. It was because it was nominated for a bunch of stuff, but it won like best cinematography and stuff. But it was nominated for like foreign language film and original screenplay, and it didn't win either of those. There was
again mid 2000s. It would take a long time before, and again, the Oscars. We always talk about this quite frequently on the show. The Oscars, yes, it's bullshit. Of course, it is. It's politics and backslapping and nonsense. But outwardly, to the general public, it is important because we talked about this when Parasite won. You see a very clear rise in interest in Korean cinema and television because they go, "Oh, I'll watch that. It won Best Picture." It's like you'd never given it time of day before, but because it won Best Picture, you're curious. And similarly, it's the whole. So this is a film made by a Mexican dude. It's like, yes, and it's in Spanish, yes, and it's very European, yes. No, we'll just give it some technical award sort of stuff. We'll put it in the best international foreign language picture sort of thing, but it deserves to be Best Picture, and the performances deserve to be recognized. No. That's not for them. We've got to talk about. I don't know what they're talking about at the time. That might have been the year of like Walk the Line and Ray, possibly. But the idea is not saying that they're bad films.
The Departed won Best Picture that year.
The Departed, a remake won Best Picture. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So there we go. And then that was the classic. Like Scorsese hasn't won anything yet. It's been X amount of years. And classic with Oscars, it's always we're preoccupied with what we should have done rather than what you should be doing now. And Pan's Labyrinth
is your retroactive award for your previous contributions for a movie that's actually not your best movie. We should have given it to you 10 years ago.
And to be honest, I personally, for me, I think that particular discussion is going to come up when we talk about a future movie of Del Toro's that did win Oscars. And that's just my opinion. Because I genuinely think this is the movie that should have won. This is the movie that it's his magnum opus. For me, there's nothing about this movie that's, bad or wrong, or everything about it is, it's got this kind of war story in the background. It's got this tale of childhood innocence. It's got fairy tales and mythological creatures, and it's genuine horror as well. This is a movie that frightens me to this day. It's genuinely scary. Doug Jones as the fawn. I mean, he's scary enough as the fawn. Which actually, one of the things that I picked up on the episode that I did on Pan's Labyrinth was I didn't actually realise that the fawn ages backwards. And it was something that I never picked up on. I've seen this movie so many times. I never picked up on the fact that the fawn ages backwards, because as Ophelia basically completes her tasks, she becomes closer to being the princess of the underworld. The fawn ages backwards, and he becomes more youthful because she's getting closer to kind of achieving that goal. But this film, it just breaks my heart. Absolutely, every single time, without fail, I am sobbing at this film. And I'm one of those people, I don't like films that make me cry. I don't like to watch E.T. for that very reason, because I know I'm going to cry. Pan's Labyrinth, I know I'm going to cry. I know it's going to hit me every single time like a ton of bricks, that ending. And yet I will watch it again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
And I can't say that about many movies. And I think it's just, there's a visual splendor to it. There's, content-wise, I mean, there's so much rich content in this movie as well. Listen to my episode on Pan's Labyrinth for more on Pan's Labyrinth. The making of this movie blows my mind. Like Jack kind of alluded to earlier, with the tiny bits of CG in this movie, just to kind of add a little bit.
Yep.
But otherwise, everything is practical. It's all beautifully made.
It's the blend of the two, isn't it? It's amazing.
I just, this movie blows my tiny little mind. And again, like I say, showing my cards, but
that's good timing, because you're up first to vote. So.
Oh, okay. I guess I'm just going to have to say it then. I think Chronos as a debut is astonishingly good, but Pan's Labyrinth, no question.
Yeah, no, I agree. Pan's Labyrinth. Jack?
Yep, Pan's Labyrinth for me as well.
Yep. Yeah, like we say, Chronos is an incredibly assured debut and shows so much talent, but Pan's Labyrinth is his masterwork. So
this is interesting, because so far we've had 4 each time. There's been no dissent yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is good. This is very rare for us. This is quite interesting. So Pacific Rim and Hellboy 2: The Golden Army.
Two
big
subsequent movies. Interesting.
Very different movies.
Yes. Very different. Both, weirdly enough, very like comic booky in their own ways and very kind of bombastic in their own ways, but very, very different. So let's start with Hellboy 2, The Golden Army from 2008. Again, bang on 2 hours. There's a theme building with Mr. Del Toro here. 86% on the tomatometer with an audience score of 71. And then forward to 2013 to Pacific Rim. Again, we've touched on both of these franchises on the show previously. Matt has done his own version of Uprising on a previous episode. So you've heard us talk about Pacific Rim before, but as I said, 2013's 72% on the tomatometer with an audience score of 77. Interestingly enough, audience score slightly higher, which I think says a lot about what a kind of film Pacific Rim is compared to a lot of other Del Toro stuff. I think because we've touched on stuff like Chronos and Mimic, which I think sits well with quite a lot of film critics, and like I said, with my initial experience with Pan's Labyrinth as well, going in as an unknowing, complete novice to Del Toro or any of this stuff coming in, it was quite a culture shock for me to be like, I'm watching a Spanish film. Oh, is it a fairy tale? Well, yes, it is, but it's also terrifying and there's horrible fucking things going on. But then Pacific Rim is pretty accessible and pretty kind of Western friendly and pretty kind of like, it's big robots. You guys have seen, Godzilla's and anime and stuff has all crossed over and built this kind of thing up over the last 60 years, basically, since Godzilla debuted in the 50s. We're kind of aware of kaijus and mechs and stuff in the West, so yeah, cool, we'll just get into that. And then to spin off to Hellboy 2 briefly, like, Del Toro does a sequel. I was like, holy shit, he's actually doing a sequel, and they're letting him do a sequel to Hellboy, which I was fascinated by. And yeah, I love both Hellboy films. We'll obviously get into the first one later on. But I think Hellboy 2 lives up to the first one. I think is one of the few kind of comic book sequels of this kind of era that isn't inside the Marvel universe that really, really does an interesting job of expanding on its characters and doing something a bit different and expanding out of it.
It's so much more his movie as well, Hellboy 2.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
The first one has his touches on it in the practical effects, in a bunch of stuff. But
Ron Perlman being there.
Yeah, like Hellboy 2. Hellboy 2 almost is like, I know some people who don't rate it. They still like it, but they're a little bit angry because it's quite different to how the comics are. Because it's just Del Toro coming in and going like, yeah, I know what kind of movie I want to make, and I'm gonna make it, and stuff like the troll market sequence and the Angel of Death that we've got there in the icon, like, they're such Del Toro creations, and they, in a way, they aren't based on the comic book, but I think he does a pretty good job of making it feel like a coherent world. And yeah, I think it's a really interesting sequel.
Yeah, I mean, one's pure fantasy, one's pure science fiction. Both really indulgent, but in a really positive way. You could do these kind of movies and both of them be incredibly disappointing. And for some people, they are disappointed by these things. As you say, you've got people who really expect a lot because they're so invested in the Hellboy stories that have been crafted by Mike Mignola over the years. And this is not really that. This is its own thing.
And Hellboy's an interesting thing because Mignola was the sole creative influence on that franchise for decades. Like, in very, very few comic book characters do you get kind of like, the original creator is still the guy that is writing and drawing every single panel and every single line of every single comic book. Obviously, that hasn't been true for a few years now. There's been big spin-offs with Abe Sapien getting his own books and BPRD, and Hellboy is now drawn and written by other people because Mignola kind of opened it up and all that kind of stuff. But he's such a shadow over the top of Hellboy. Like, whenever you do, and we talked about the not so great remake with David Harbour and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah,
it's interesting how much these films kind of deviate from that comic book, but actually still tell an interesting story with these characters.
Yeah, and it's especially interesting when you look at Del Toro's Hellboy movies, and obviously I know we're going to talk about the first one in a little bit, but this one is so Del Toro. It is so far removed from not only the first movie, if you look at the first movie kind of in its own context, but so far removed from Mike Mignola's original stories. And so when you get to a point where, as a movie fan, as I said earlier, still lament that we didn't get a Hellboy 3 from Del Toro.
Yeah.
But, then when they come out and they say, no, actually, we're going to reboot it. We're going to reboot this franchise. And Mike Mignola's going to be involved. And you go, well, okay, it's probably going to be really good then. But then it's missing all of these things that we, the audience, are used to from Del Toro.
The little magic, the little
a little bit of Del Toro spice is what it's missing. And I mean, I was not a fan of that rebooted Hellboy movie, not because I don't like David Harbour.
Nobody was.
No, I'm sure someone was, but nothing against David Harbour. Nothing. I think he's
Agreed.
a fine actor. But he's not Ron Perlman. He doesn't bring
that is
same
such a problem
thing.
for that film, isn't it? Yeah.
Ron Perlman is Hellboy. He simply is Hellboy. And I know that he's obviously getting on in age. And even if they did announce a Hellboy 3 now, it's probably going to be a state where he's going to say, "Oh, actually, I don't want to do it because I'm getting on." And and absolutely, he needs to be in a certain amount of shape to do that role. But oh
they
my
just
God,
build the fake muscles on top. We'll be fine.
what a perfect trilogy that would be. I mean, it would be the perfect trilogy. I know we're not here to talk about Hellboy 3, but for me, Hellboy 2: The Golden Army is one of those rare sequels that, like you say, it expands on the universe that Hellboy originally kind of started with, but it's so Del Toro. And going from Pan's Labyrinth to this, I just immediately fell in love with Hellboy 2. This is the movie out of all of these movies that I've seen the most times. I adore this movie. I can sit and watch this movie quite happily. I've seen this more than the original Hellboy. I am, and I've done an episode on the 2 Hellboys as well. So I've done an episode on this one, and I adore this movie. One of the things that actually I managed to get in those 2 Hellboy episodes was I actually managed to get the involvement of Peter Briggs, and Peter Briggs was the writer of Hellboy. I actually managed to get him on for that first episode, kind of a little it was like a little bit of a fake interview where I sent him questions because there wasn't really much time for me to actually kind of sit with him and interview him.
Yeah, of course.
So I basically sent him questions and he sent me the responses, and I basically, using the power of podcast wizardry, I put it all together. But he had some really interesting thoughts on the second movie as well. So he's also included in the second episode the one I did on Hellboy 2, with a couple of his kind of thoughts and ideas about the franchise and about where the franchise was going to go and all of that sort of stuff. It's all really fascinating. But this movie really is. It's when you talk about Pan's Labyrinth, it's not really a movie that you can sit with as a family and watch with kids and all of that.
I tried to, it didn't work.
I mean, it's pretty scary for adults, so I can't really imagine you want to show that to kids. But something like Hellboy 2: The Golden Army, it's so accessible. You could sit and watch this with kids, and you can enjoy it from a story point of view. The story is reasonably simple, but again, most of these comic book movies are reasonably simple stories. But Del Toro just kind of envisions it with such beautiful characters and just bringing the characters that we know, apart from certain characters who don't appear in the sequel. I'm talking about Myers. So we don't have Myers, but we do kind of. It's a continuation of this story, and it's genuinely beautiful to look at. I think Tim, you mentioned the troll market. And the troll market scene and all of that. It's just so beautifully realised. They shot scenes in Ireland for it at the Causeway, and I just can't get over how beautiful this film is. And again, we've got Doug Jones as Abe Sapien in a much more meaty role than he's given in the first movie as well,
and voicing himself instead of David Hyde Pierce as well.
I was just about to say voicing himself as well. We've got Luke Goss returning from Blade 2 to play Prince Nuada, who's a very underrated villain, actually. In all kind of comic book villains, no one talks about Prince Nuada, but he's a relatable villain. Man is basically destroying the world, and it's something that it's in the news every day about what we're doing to our planet. And Prince Nuada basically realizes this, and he wants to do something about it because he's sick of man. And mainly man, but maybe some women as well, but mostly men. And it's a really relatable villain story as well. And you've got some weird brother-sister things going on.
I was going to say relatable apart from the incest, right? Because
I mean, it's more implied, isn't it, than anything. They obviously have a link because they're twins, and so if she bleeds, he bleeds, and all of that sort of stuff. But that's quite brings a kind of this tragic love story in, is that if you kill Nuada, then you are going to kill Nuala as well. And then Abe has this really nice little relationship with Nuala, and I really love that. I feel like I've talked too much about Hellboy 2: The Golden Army, but I think it's wonderful.
I can get into mechs. I don't
climb in your mech, Matt.
Yeah, I was going to say it's interesting you bring up the thing, because I think that you're entirely right. Goss is one of those people in both Blade 2 and Hellboy 2 who gets forgotten about, despite being incredibly impressive for, one of the fucking singers from Bros being surprisingly good.
Yes.
Yeah. And both of these films are environmental pieces. They are commentaries on the human effect on the world. And in Hellboy 2, it's about... Hellboy 2 is one of those examples, a very early example, of using a sort of CGI stop-motion kind of look to tell a flashback. Or to bring out the lore and mythology. So rather than just characters expositing, you'd have this cutaway to this beautiful scene of like marionettes having this fight, and it's beautiful. And then after that, I remember Deathly Hallows 1, I want to say, a few years later, doing the same sort of thing. It's like it became a trend people started putting in lots of movies, and it's still seen today. But I think Del Toro might be one of the first to use it so strongly. But again, it's like, as you said, it's the idea of man was born with a hole in him that could never be filled. That there's this creature. The same way that Tolkien does the same thing with Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
That they're a corrupt race. That they have good in them, but ultimately they're very greedy, and they will absorb the world, and they'll wipe out the last of the creatures in the name of progress and industry, etc., etc., etc. Which is classic sort of like mythology, fantasy versus hard reality, science, etc., etc. Pacific Rim is what happens when things come to us that we can't fucking figure out and can't combat. We'll use monsters to smash it up. We'll use these giant, robots to hold everything back. We can build walls. We have to really take the fight to them. And it takes the representation of, let's face it, tsunamis and earthquakes and other awful, devastating natural effects that we have exacerbated ourselves, and said, what if we had the ability to do something about that by punching it in the face with a bucket? Boom. And it's really, as a fan, Jack talked earlier about the audience being primed to kaiju stuff. A lot of the audience grew up with things like Power Rangers. You used to have big robots smashing a big lizard. Yeah. And I love a lot of it. As we've covered obviously these things before. It's so problematically flawed in places, Pacific Rim, but it's only when you see Pacific Rim Uprising that you realize how much Del Toro elevates it.
Oh yeah! Jesus Christ, that was bad. Do you know what? Can I just quickly say, Pacific Rim, is, like you say, it is flawed. There are some really great things in Pacific Rim. I think if anything, it kind of comments on building walls is never the best idea. Donald Trump, don't build a wall, basically, because walls are crap. And walls don't stop big monsters from coming. Who seriously would build a wall to stop a huge monster? It's just the most ridiculous. I know they do on Attack on Titan as well, but the
French built the Maginot Line. It didn't work. The Nazis went round.
But Pacific Rim also, for the let's take away Charlie Hunnam, because God bless him, he's trying. He's really trying. And he's, how can he go from something as great as Queer as Folk to his roles in Crimson Peak and Pacific Rim? Because I really do think he's the weakest in both. Hunnam's
someone who's never really landed for me. And he's,
no. But then when you have a character like Makamori, just such a great character, she's not there to be the love interest. She's not there to go googly eyes at the main, character with his shirt off. She's there to do a job. You've got fantastic Idris Elba giving a great speech about
cancelling the
apocalypse, the apocalypse, all of that. There's some really great things in Pacific Rim, and obviously, who doesn't like smashy monster robot fights? I love them. I love Godzilla movies. I love don't love Transformers movies, but there are decent things in some Transformers movies. Bumblebee's really great.
Bumblebee's great. Yeah.
Bumblebee's great. The 1986 animated Transformers movie is similarly great. But yeah, there's something about Pacific Rim that it is, again, it's a very accessible movie. You can sit there and you can watch it with kids. But for me, why would you create a wonderful character like Makamori, a character that has an actual test named after her? You know, when it comes to female representation in movies, she's that important in movies.
Yeah.
And then in the sequel, first of all, you don't do anything with the character. And then, spoiler alert, you kill her off. You know, you kill her off in the worst possible way. As soon as that happened in Pacific Rim Uprising, I was like, no, I don't like this anymore. You've killed off the best character. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Makamori is so important as a character. And there's some beautiful scenes in Pacific Rim as well. You know, just some really heartfelt scenes between Makamori and I can't remember what the Idris Elba character's called.
Pentecost.
Pentecost. Yeah, Stack of Pentecost.
Yep. Yeah.
You know, that beautiful kind of father-daughter relationship that they have. It's something that I feel like a lot of people will just dismiss it as fluff and just say, oh, well, it doesn't really mean anything because it is just smashy monsters and robots and all of that. And it is that. But, you know, the whole idea of you have to mentally and physically connect with another human being in order to pilot a Jaeger and what that can actually do to a person if it goes wrong. I find that so fascinating, and it's something that the movie kind of doesn't really dwell on too much, but it shows what can happen to the people who are piloting these things. I mean, you know, absolutely huge robots, and the physical toll and the emotional toll and the mental toll that you have to be so connected. I can't remember what exactly they use. They use a certain phrase to kind
drift
of say,
compatible.
That's it, drift compatibility. I find that quite interesting. And it pains me that the sequel just kind of shit all over it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Well, it's Del Toro being a fan of mech anime and tokusatsu style shows, and understanding all this stuff, and knowing that it's not just, oh, I get to drive the big, you know, man-shaped tank, yay, and I can smashy. It's more the idea of doing this is a psychological feat. I mean, the best mech anime stuff is almost always about the toll on pilots. And to do something where they have to have like a simpatico, or they have to be something that they're so aligned. There's so much in this film that works, and yet there's so much that really doesn't. And I would like to have seen him do a sequel to rectify that. And I didn't do that in my pitch, but there we go. But no, I would like to see where he would have gone with it, much like Hellboy and Hellboy 2. Because Hellboy 2 is a departure from Hellboy 1. I'd be curious to see if Pacific Rim would be an equally similar departure. But yeah. But we should vote. It's me first.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Tim, did I cut you off? I apologize.
I was just going to touch on a few things and
sorry.
I love how we've kind of talked about how the Pacific Rim is about climate change and how it highlights the fact that it's an international movie, and it's about an international response and the world coming together in the face of a threat and actually doing something. And there being stupid people who are like, we can just build a wall, it'll be fine. But no, you have to be proactive in fighting these things. And I think, it's so great. It's great because it finds that emotional heart to what could just be a punchy robot story. And we said, you know, Uprising is an example of that without the heart. It's Del Toro taking something and elevating it to its best version. And I think it's fascinating because he's such a fantasy director. Like so many of his films, as we're finding, deal with fantasy, deal with the supernatural. For him to take on something that's so science fiction and to be able to find like the beauty in these huge machines, and to give them that physical presence is a really interesting example of him pivoting his skill set to a slightly different genre area.
Entirely.
Agreed.
So, Matt.
It is me. It's me. Yes. Okay.
Mm.
Hellboy 2: The Golden Army.
Same for me. Hellboy 2. Tim?
I'm pretty sure I know the way this is going, but I'm going to register my dissent because I really fucking love Pacific Rim.
Ooh.
Nice.
And so
You'd think it'd be me, but no.
I'm going to give it. I'm going to give it just a mark of recognition. For
what
how
has
good
the
it
world
is.
come to where Tim voted for the mechs, but Matt didn't? What is
Dark
going
time.
on here?
Halloween.
This is the dark timeline.
And what about yourself?
Round us off.
Okay. So I actually really like that one of us voted for Pacific Rim because I do feel like there's a lot more to it than people give it credit for.
Yeah.
However, I am so in love with Hellboy 2: The Golden Army that I have to give it to Hellboy 2. I'm sorry, Pacific Rim. I feel bad for Pacific Rim.
No, I know exactly what you mean. I know what you mean when you're coming from with that. Yep. Right. Here we go. A very interesting discussion. No. Ape Sapien versus Ape Sapien.
Am we going to do the one above first, Matt?
Yes, we have.
How dare you be right, Tim? Sorry, Tim. You are of course correct, Tim. My apologies. Yeah. So Blade 2 we discussed at great length. The Devil's Backbone is the other Spanish Civil War film and the other ghost story film.
Yep.
And another one that's very, very underrepresented. From released just before Blade 2.
2001, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Jack, give us the numbers.
Yeah.
You got 92% on the tomatometer with an audience score of 89%. So pretty close in the grand scheme of things. And I think it's something a lot of people, like you said, Matt, one of the least appreciated, underappreciated, least seen, I think, of his back catalogue. Incredibly low budget. I know I've kind of touched on some budgets here and there. Budget of less than $5 million for this. It also made fuck all of the box office, but welcome to early Del Toro, everybody. He didn't make any money until he went bigger studio kind of stuff, unfortunately. But yeah, Devil's Backbone, we've already touched on Blade 2. So Blade 2 are the much bigger budget but less critically acclaimed of the two of them here, essentially. We're talking big budget, big Hollywood kind of stuff versus much smaller, more critically acclaimed. And quite the battle, I think, here.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting one, I think, for so many different reasons, because this is the movie that I've seen most recently. I watched this literally on Thursday for the first time. And again, it was one of those, why have I not seen this sooner? Because honestly, this movie is incredible. It's kind of sad and painful that not many people have seen this. Because there's so much of Del Toro's other work in this movie, in a sense of you can see shades of Crimson Peak in this movie, a lot of shades of Crimson Peak in this movie. You can see shades of Pan's Labyrinth in this movie. Obviously, Del Toro has a history of having child protagonists. So in Chronos, there's a child protagonist. Pan's Labyrinth has a child protagonist. This has many child protagonists in it, but obviously one main child protagonist. And I mean, this genuinely blew me away. I was not expecting I wasn't expecting it to be a ghost story. And I'm not a huge fan of ghost stories as a rule. I wasn't expecting it to be quite so emotionally resonant and quite so, because again, we've touched on this. It's also set during the Spanish Civil War. So there's obviously, it's set at an orphanage. And these children are obviously the children of presumably like dead soldiers and stuff like that, rebels. And then basically they are hiding gold in the orphanage from the fascist regime in order to help the rebellion. And it's something that Pan's Labyrinth also touches on, is, it's hiding rebels and supporting the rebellion. And it's something that both movies, I think, deal with really well. They don't dwell on the things. They don't dwell too much on the war. But it's a really interesting kind of, excuse the pun, backbone for this movie. But again, it's
sort of
characters that you wouldn't expect to be the heroes of the story, like an old man, like a young boy. This movie is astonishingly good.
Yeah.
Please, if you're watching this, I don't know if anyone's still watching. I don't know. I hope there are people still watching. Hello. But if you've not seen The Devil's Backbone, please, please, please watch this movie. Please, it's a great movie for Halloween.
Similar to your experience, this was my one I had to go out of my way to watch. This is not one I had seen before preparing for this live stream, if that makes sense. I went out of my way to see Mimic, and I went out of my way to see Devil's Backbone. And we've got a couple of people. They are watching, waving hello. Yes, we are still watching.
Hi.
Hello. I know I haven't touched on the comments in a little while, so it seems like we're just speaking into the void. But I know we're also, it's 8:10 and we've got a lot to go
crikey,
through.
Okay.
So. But yeah, I think Devil's Backbone is an interesting one because, like you said, I came to it 20 years later in 2021, much like you did. And like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the gothic, ghosty kind of story. This is my preferred, for want of a better phrase, preferred version of Crimson Peak. This is the ghost story I prefer to Crimson Peak.
Yes,
this
definitely.
is Crimson Peak. Having seen that first, I felt like, oh, this is the Guillermo del Toro ghost kind of story I can really sink my teeth through. And I think it's because you've got that, similar to Pan's Labyrinth, you've got that structure of the war and the soldiers and all that kind of stuff as this kind of framing device that works so well to then build the more fantastical stuff. You have it grounded in a way that then lets you kind of explore the fantastical stuff from a slightly different perspective. Whereas I feel like Crimson Peak is pretty like, ooh, spooky straight away kind of thing. It felt kind of less rooted in reality for me. And I think I need that in a lot of the kind of more, for want of a better phrase, silly, spooky kind of stuff. Because I'm not much of a horror guy, as I'm sure some of the viewers know, in general. So I usually need something else to really kind of bite into and hold on to. But yeah, I think in particular, Fernando Tielves, his performance and his first feature film performance as Carlos is spectacular. Like, unbelievably good for just picking this guy out of nowhere and just being like, you are the lead in my film now. And I know Del Toro kind of describes him as like this force of innocence, this like almost like a surrogate kind of audience member in a lot of ways. And I think he's interesting because like I wasn't really, I didn't really know what to expect. Similar to Pan's Labyrinth, I now went in with the expectation of, I know kind of what to expect from a Del Toro movie. But I was thoroughly impressed by Devil's Backbone. Tim, do you have any sort of history with Devil's Backbone or anything like that?
I saw this probably about 10-ish years ago, when I first became aware of Del Toro as a name of like, oh, this is someone who I should watch their stuff. You know, I should watch everything that they do. And made a point of finding The Devil's Backbone to see, because I'd seen it be really well reviewed and in various stuff. And yeah, I thought it was fantastic. I think it deals with war and with fascism in such an interesting way, in the sense that like the story, as much as the characters are haunted by ghosts, they are haunted by the war. And you have that amazing image of the bomb that has dropped into the orphanage and has just failed to go off and is just sitting there in the center of like the courtyard, just waiting to go off. And it's the tension in this film is so good, both the kind of the supernatural and the real, you know. And I think in some ways it feels like a dry run for Pan's Labyrinth. And Pan's Labyrinth deals with a lot of the same themes. Obviously, it's Spanish Civil War. It's dealing with like childhood innocence in the face of just
fascism and
horror,
war and stuff.
And blending the supernatural and the real. But I think Devil's Backbone is so like, I think the view now would be like, oh, it's him warming up to do Pan's Labyrinth. But really, it's so good that they're more companion pieces. They deal with a lot of the same themes, but they are equally good. Well, we'll find out whether they're equal. But I think,
interesting enough, you touched on Del Toro says that himself. Like, they are spiritual cousins. They are very much connected and thematically connected and stuff. And
Yeah.
he certainly doesn't see it as a warm up to his. Obviously, he wouldn't undersell his own work because that's not the kind of guy Guillermo is. But yeah, he definitely sees them as this two interconnected pieces that I think makes a lot of sense, even though they are, a few years apart in his
I think he
timeline.
Said there's like 3 of his films where he was like, if this failed, I would have given up being a filmmaker. And I'm pretty sure Devil's Backbone is one of them. I think Shape of Water is another. I can't remember what the third is. But yeah, I think it's like it's very personal for him. And it comes like he had some family tragedy around this time, and I think this was his first film after Mimic, and it was him basically being like, well, fuck the studios, I'm going to make the kind of film that I want to make. And you get brilliance from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we also need to shout out as well how wonderfully cast all of these movies actually are, apart from Charlie Hunnam. But especially child actors. I'm sorry, Charlie Hunnam. Especially child actors, because child actors are notoriously difficult to cast because they're children. But
and they're often crap.
They're often not great. But if you look at The Devil's Backbone, the child actors in that movie are incredible. You look at Ivana Bacquero in Pan's Labyrinth. I mean, how incredible is that young girl? I mean, the whole movie rests on her, and it's similar in The Devil's Backbone as well. The whole movie rests on Carlos, really, and his discovery of the stories. Kind of the ghost story, the behind what's going on at this orphanage, and to find such wonderful child actors. I mean, it's a skill. It's an absolute skill. But to be honest, I think that Del Toro always casts mostly the best people for the roles that he has. And
I think he's got a genuine talent for working with kids, because even the kids in Mimic. That show up and sell the weird bugs to Mina Sorvino. Like, he gets great performances out of them. And
Little Makomori in Pacific Rim.
Little Makomori.
Little Makomori. Yeah, she's great.
And him telling her to call him Totoro or whatever he did.
Yes,
he's
got that kind of childlike innocence and wonder to him, hasn't he? Because he's such a fan of all of this stuff. He's just like a big fanboy making all of this. I love horror movies. I'm just going to make a bunch of really cool horror movies and just do whatever I like. And I don't know if you've ever heard, he hosted I can't remember if it was a Comic-Con thing, but it was a screening for Scott Pilgrim. And Edgar Wright and Michael Cera have told this story before, where there's a bunch of teenagers and kids sitting down and they've just watched this movie. And he goes on the entire panel is a 25-minute rant from Del Toro. This is the greatest fucking movie of the century. You guys don't even understand. You kids, you're going to try and make your own fucking movies. This is the best goddamn movie I have seen in 15 fucking years. You need to, the Scott Pilgrim is a fucking masterpiece. And there's 12-year-olds yep. And it's and a question for Michael Cera. You're okay, great. And you'd really I feel like he can really relate with his passion and his kind of wonderment to be working with all these amazing talented people. Like you said, the casting directors he works with, the cast that he works with, the special effects people he works with. There's a real kind of passion and wonderment, and almost like a childlike innocence there that I think really helps him work with so many different people. And like you said to him, especially kids, the Totoro story is adorable. He's this big cuddly Mexican teddy bear guy. Of course he's Totoro.
I'm gonna okay, so autobiographically I have to dissent briefly, but only just. So Devil's Backbone, of course I love The Devil's Backbone. Of course it's a phenomenal movie. Of course it's spectacular. My frustration was that when I first saw it, it was a hard thing to come by. It was a very difficult DVD to get a hold of. It wasn't on Blu-ray for a very long time. And I saw it after a film that Guillermo del Toro was producer on but didn't direct, called El Orfanato, or The Orphanage, by Bayona, which I really fucking like. I love The Orphanage. I think it's a fantastic movie. So frustratingly, I really connected with that movie and I loved it. And then maybe not next year, but 6 months later, because I saw it in the cinema. 6 months later, I finally got a copy properly of The Devil's Backbone, and because it was another ghost orphanage story with a lot of Del Toro presence to it, I was like, and it was too much in one go. So it took me a while to get back into the Devil's Backbone and really appreciate it for what it was and what it is, which is just genuinely, truly a beautiful allegory, a beautiful story. And as we said before, it's not really about the jump scare of the ghost. It's about the ghost being an interesting character, about a presence. And, one side you've got Pan's Labyrinth, where, it's very clear that Franco's, Franco being the Spanish dictator in charge of Spain at the time, his army is an evil presence that needs to be eradicated and rooted out and destroyed. Obviously, they're terrible oppressors. But at the Devil's Backbone, the people who are sort of involved in the resistance kind of just as shitty at times. And it's like, that's the nature of a civil war. There aren't a lot of real sides. It's like, oh, here's a clear good, evil sort of thing. And obviously children being swept up in the whole thing, being so very tragic. And the as you mentioned earlier, the idea of the bomb waiting to go off. The idea that it's not just, it's been diffused, obviously. So it's just there as a monument, but it's still a testament to, if this war doesn't end, you will inherit this war, kids. You might as well have this around your neck. So there's so much going on visually. Also, lots of shit in jars. Little creepy fetus rum.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But no, I think just to mirror what everyone said, I think it's another masterpiece, frankly. But again, one that's so hard to come by, one people don't really know about, and people should seek it out. Jack? I think you're voting first.
It's Jack.
Hello. After singing Devil's Backbone's praises, I'm going to go Blade 2. Because I fucking love Blade 2. Tim, how about you?
I'm going to go with the Devil's Backbone.
Here we go.
I really like Blade 2, but I think there are elements of Blade 2 that have aged, whereas Devil's Backbone is kind of timeless. I mean, it has that benefit of being like a period piece. So, but yeah, I think it's so good and on such a small budget. Yeah.
Fair.
Oh God. Okay. Okay. So. Oh, okay. This is harder than I thought it was going to be. Why is this so hard?
To give you some time to think, I've got a quote here from the Scott Pilgrim screening I mentioned. I just looked it up. There is a quote here from Del Toro, and I'll flash it up on screen. When they ask, why does Hollywood make such shitty movies? It's because when they do great ones, you don't fucking show up.
There it is. So true.
Yeah, very true.
He's the man.
Especially in the case of Del Toro.
Yeah,
exactly. Del Toro. We touched on the mediocre box office throughout his career. That kind of sums it up.
I think only Pacific Rim has done greater than 100 million.
The only one, yeah.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah. But yeah, anyway. Okay, so I need to make a decision.
Yeah.
And it's
Shape of Water
than
made
I
a bunch
thought
of
it was
money as
going
well,
to
by the way. But yeah.
Sorry, what was that?
The Shape of Water made like $200 million as well.
To be fair, that's Oscar.
Okay.
That's got Oscar Backbone. So I think before that, but yes.
No, it's Devil's Backbone, not Oscar's Backbone, Matthew.
Oscar is the name of the devil.
Okay. I've made a decision.
Okay.
Drum roll, please.
I feel like I should. I would normally do what they do on reality shows and do a big dramatic pause, but I don't feel like we've got time for a big.
Yeah, we need the emotional music and stuff.
Okay, so I love Blade 2 for so many reasons. I think it's absolutely incredible.
Nobody says the one they're picking first, do they? That's worrying.
But I feel like the Devil's Backbone, I have to give it to that one, not just because I think it is technically superior, and it's just so emotionally resonant, but I think it just deserves to go through because
Fair.
Hardly anyone knows about it. And
Yeah.
I feel like if it goes through, then maybe people will actually think, oh, this movie is really good. If it can win against Blade 2, then it must be decent. So I have to go with The Devil's Backbone.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. Blade 2.
Matthew. Are you actually picking Blade 2? We're gonna have to go to the audience.
I'm not even kidding. So
Oh my God.
I'll tell you my reasoning. Devil's Backbone.
Audience,
my own
before you
bias
start, Matt. Audience, get your votes in now. Start the comments. I will flash them up on screen when we come through. Matt, start your little diatribe.
I will explain. Devil's Backbone's glorious. It's fantastic. I mentioned about, not necessarily the superior, maybe it is for me personally, the superior orphanage ghost story is The Orphanage, which Del Toro's hand is involved with, because I think it's a more refined version of the story in a weird way. And the better, Spanish Civil War film is Pan's Labyrinth. So I see what this film is, and I love it, but I also know there are better versions of it in different capacities. Blade 2 is one of those rare things of a sequel that is better than the thing that came before it. And it is hideously underrated for it. Just think about the Jared Nomak thing again. It's like, oh yeah. And Thomas Crashman playing the old ass vampire, the blood pack and everything, and the bittersweet end of it all. There's so much going on in Blade that I'm just sort of linking back in, and to misquote Del Toro, who says, "Oh, obviously these movies are your best movies. These movies where you've got the passionate war movies where you're saying something." And Del Toro responded with, "Fuck you! I make one movie," because the idea is they're all parts of his personality. They're all parts of things he loves. They're all extensions of him. So to invalidate one or the other is effectively wrong. So I know the logical choice is Devil's Backbone, but Blade 2 is too good for me not to at least throw it to the audience so we are absolved of any responsibility.
Well, unfortunately, we're not getting that many votes through. And
What?
Xenos being Xenos, for those of you who are regulars on our live streams and know the podcast, he's one of our executive producers. I think he's seen about 4 or 5 films in total. So he's a bit of a tricky one sometimes. This is Xenos' comment. I don't really have an opinion between these two, but I don't think I'd enjoy Devil's Backbone.
Oh, no. It's
Brilliant.
really good. It's really genuinely great. But I feel like as well, because not many people have seen The Devil's Backbone, I feel like Blade 2 might just go through by default because people will have seen Blade 2. And they won't have seen The Devil's Backbone.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sad if Blade 2 goes through. I will be a bit sad, but yeah.
Even thinking about our audience as well, we've done an episode on Blade Trinity, so people are going to be aware of Blade 2, specifically in our audience as well, such as Andy Steen. It's a great movie, and the critics need to think about what they did to it. Agreed.
I mean, it is.
Yeah, both are great, but I've got to admit, I've got to give it to Blade 2. I feel like Guillermo del Toro would want me to pick Blade 2, the one I enjoy more, even if I think Devil's Backbone is objectively better. And I think that's a very interesting point. I think Devil's Backbone is probably the better movie, but I like Blade 2 more because I'm a big Blade fan and I love what it did as a sequel and all this kind of stuff. I love the forensic explanation. I've only seen Blade 2, so cannot vote. So yeah, we've got at least 3 votes there for Blade and none for Devil's Backbone.
Yeah.
Blade 2,
a lot of people are going to be very pissed off.
Yeah, well, that's the way it goes, isn't it? Like I say, Blade 2 is worthy. It's not that it's not worthy.
Yes, of course.
Fair.
Yep. Right. Fish versus fish. The Shape of Water, Oscar-winning, quite unique for Del Toro.
$200 million at the box office.
Yeah.
Oscar-winning, big deal from 2017. So at time of recording his most recent film. Like you said, we'll get onto Pinocchio and a couple of other bits and pieces in the next 18 months or so. 92% on the tomatometer for Shape of Water, with a 72% from the audience. That's kind of what I'd expect, to be honest. It was a critical darling, like we said, it won Oscars and stuff, but I think some of the audience found it not as accessible and all that kind of stuff. It's a Del Toro movie. There you go. That's kind of what you expect at this point.
Yeah.
And we've already touched on Hellboy 2, but talking of the original Hellboy from 2004 81% on the Tomatometer with a 66% audience score. Criminally underrated there, by the way, from the audience. Shame on you, audience. But yes, this is Battle of the Fishmen, which I guess is appropriate. So I need to mask up for this one. That's only fair.
Yeah.
I'm gonna rip through some stuff. Hellboy, I saw in the cinema. I love the comics. I was really looking forward to it. It does adapt a lot of the sort of classic story elements for Red Right Hand of Doom and things, and other bits and pieces, and it's great. And Ron Perlman is so iconic. The makeup, the prosthetics, it's fucking great. David Hyde Pierce.
Better than our prosthetics, Matthew?
No comment. David Hyde Pierce. I mean, I'm dressed as Hellboy underneath it, so you just can't see it. David Hyde Pierce is, and I can understand why the studio would go, yeah. Doug Jones says that we'll get him. He's a recognizable name. And then the man doing the job, then saying, "I've added nothing to this movie. Take my name off the credits. There's no point in me being here."
Yeah.
And I like that sort of humility from an acting point of view.
Yeah.
The production design's fantastic. It's great. It's wonderful. And really, after Blade 2, I thought, whatever this guy does next, excuse me. Sorry, I've had nothing to drink. So yes, after Blade 2, I thought, whatever this guy does next, I'll happily follow. And Hellboy was just cemented that, follow this man's career. The Shape of Water it splits so many people because I love it as a movie. I think it's fantastic. I think it's genuinely amazing. But the fact it won Best Picture was so surprising to me. It's like, again, it's oh shit, he's finally done one that's a bit like Pan's Labyrinth. Give him the Oscar quickly. It's like, okay, interesting move. But I think there's a lot of genre-defying stuff. It's a very, very different type of film. Again, the prosthetics and the performances are there. It's his usual things are on display. But for those who love Del Toro, how can I phrase it? It's like Yorgos Lanthimos doing The Favorite, where you've got people who love Killing of a Sacred Deer and The Lobster going, yeah, it's good. It's not weird enough. And all the people who want to go, ooh, Olivia Colman's in a period film. Yeah. It looks quite funny. And go, oh, it's too weird. You don't really hit that perfect balance. So you got the Del Toro fans saying, yeah, it's good. I like a lot of it, but also it's not his best. And people saying, it's weird. I don't really understand what it is. I'm like, yeah, but you can both appreciate it's well made, right? It's like, yeah, we can. You going to watch it again? Yeah, I might.
I think it's a thing of like, it's a lot of it, obviously, like so much of it is very Del Toro. It's got, an Abe Sapien evolution. It's him dealing with monsters and people who are monstrous without looking it. It's amazing production design, like the lab and the apartments in it are so fantastic. But I also think it's him expressing stuff that that has been kind of leaking out in some of his other films, but he hasn't had a chance to. Like, I think you can draw a straight line from Hellboy and Abe Sapien singing in
oh
Hellboy
yeah,
2.
drunkenly, yeah,
yes, to stuff like the musical numbers in The Shape of Water. And I think that there is that side of Del Toro that is a bit more whimsical, that he doesn't necessarily get a chance to do with some of his other films because people expect a certain kind of like a creepiness to it, and Shape of Water isn't really that. And I really like it. I really like Shape of Water. I think it's amazing performances by pretty much everyone. Like, Doug Jones is so good. It's such a showcase for him. I love Richard Jenkins in it. I think he's so funny and so heartbreaking. I think there's so many clever themes, like him doing it in the 60s and touching on civil rights and stuff like that. There's so many. Yeah, it's such a rich picture to me. I really like it.
Yeah. I feel like I need to preface this with, I don't dislike The Shape of Water. I think
But
The
I
Shape
hate
of
fish.
Water. I love Ape Sapien.
Yes,
So
sir.
I feel I agree with everything that all of the points that have been raised so far. I think it's a beautiful looking movie. I think the production design is beautiful. I think the effects are beautiful. I think the performances are beautiful. Excuse me. I think it's so beautiful. It's making me cough.
It takes your very breath away.
So that water.
It really does. I need The Shape of Water. But I feel very much like, and I know I kind of mentioned it earlier that, and I know that Matt has already said this, but I feel like there was a very kind of reactionary response to this movie in that Del Toro has obviously done such great things in the past. It's time for his Oscar. And Leonardo DiCaprio is one of those others where every year it was like, is he going to get it? No. Is he going to get it? No. Is he going to get it? No. Oh, he's finally got it. And it was for a role that arguably probably wasn't his greatest either. If you compare it to like other roles that he did in the past. And I feel very much the same with this movie. It's not that I don't like it, because I feel like I'm going to get a huge backlash. But I don't.
Just you wait. Just you wait.
I know. I don't connect to this movie the way that I connect to Pan's Labyrinth, or even, The Devil's Backbone, even though I only saw it 2 days ago. I felt a real connection to it.
Yeah.
And when I saw The Shape of Water, from a technical point of view, I thought this is outstanding. Like, this is typical Del Toro. He's putting his mark on it. It's an outstandingly told story. There's nothing about this movie that is bad or rubbish or anything. It never has really spoken to me. The way that it's obviously spoken to some people, because some people really love this movie. But I've never kind of, basically, if Pan's Labyrinth and The Shape of Water were both dangling off a cliff, I know which one I would save immediately. I don't even need to think about it.
But what if Hellboy and The Shape of Water?
I know. This is what I'm coming to, because I am such in love with Hellboy. Because it to me, this was kind of Hellboy was kind of my introduction to Del Toro in many ways. And it was kind of exacerbated then further by Hellboy 2: The Golden Army. So I think that Hellboy kind of as a standalone movie, I mean, there are parts of it that I don't think quite work. But that's only because well, yeah. Myers is fine, but I kind of feel like, he's just there for exposition. We talked earlier about the beautiful models that Del Toro has kind of used to kind of talk about exposition in like Hellboy 2: The Golden Army, when he's actually got these beautiful dioramas, sort of dioramas, to talk about to kind of, talk about this backstory. And literally all Myers is there to do is he's Basil Exposition, isn't he? That's literally all he's there to do.
He's so transparently put in there by studio people who were like, but we can't make Hellboy the main character. We've got to have a human for you to look at. It's like, no, you really don't. He's so pointless in that film.
It's frustrating when you're trying to tell a story about how the monsters that you think are monsters because of how they look are in fact the real heroes. And the way you do that is you have like an audience, surrogate, or someone to follow the story through. It's like, okay, is that going to be your monster as well? No, it's a white man. It's like, oh, fucking great.
Yeah,
and he's
exactly
kind of annoying.
Yeah, and I've always felt quite bad for the actor who plays Myers, because I feel like he was giving a lot of shit. But I am so in love with Hellboy that, to me, this is a really obvious choice for me, but I feel like I'm probably the only person who's going to be choosing this particular way, and that's only because I have such a fondness for the character of Hellboy and these Del Toro movies and everything that Del Toro put in. And I know that Hellboy was obviously shaped by quite a bit of studio interference, because they obviously wanted something, and I love the fact that that Del Toro got to create his vision in Hellboy 2.
Yes.
They are the perfect kind of duology, really, for me. In that they are so different, but they complement each other really well. And to be honest, I feel like The Shape of Water was probably never going to win, regardless of what it was paired against. But anyway, giving away my cards again.
That's right.
I can't play poker, by the way, because I don't have a poker face. So don't ever get me to play poker, because I will just give the game away.
Fair. Tim's up first?
Tim is up first.
Yeah, Tim.
Fairly transparently, I'm going to go for The Shape of Water because I think we have seen what we've seen what Del Toro wanted a Hellboy film to be because we have Hellboy 2. And whereas The Shape of Water, you can tell that's exactly what he wants that film to be. And so I think when we're trying to strip away everything else and just talk about his work as a director, I think it's better. It's more of an expression of him and a better film at the end of the day. So I'm going with The Shape of Water. Which is
fair. An absolutely fair assessment.
However,
so as I said, The Shape of Water is technically outstanding. It shouldn't have won the Oscar in a sense that Pan's Labyrinth should. Maybe I'm holding that against The Shape of Water. And maybe I have a bias because of that. And I'll freely admit my biases. It is an astonishingly outstanding movie. And I do agree that it is more of a Del Toro movie in many regards. However, without Hellboy, we would not have Hellboy 2: The Golden Army. And for that reason, and for many other reasons, because I love the character and I love what Del Toro does, I love what Ron Perlman does, and I love what Doug Jones does in Hellboy, not just in The Shape of Water, but in Hellboy, I have to go with Hellboy.
That's fair. Nothing wrong. You've argued yourself well, and I completely understand where you're coming from. That makes complete sense.
And I know I'm going to be the only one, but it's cool.
I think Jack's a bit of a 50-50 as well. I don't know.
I've kept very quiet here for a reason. You'll find out.
I think Jack is a hard one to read here. I'm going to say Shape of Water because I'm a Ponce, but also because it's beautifully made. I think, Rasputin's a really cool, interesting bad guy, as with the comics, but Michael Shannon is a deplorable piece of shit, so a good villain.
Oh, he's so loathable.
Yeah. Mr. Was it wash before I pee business?
Yeah.
There's just, we're talking about, I think Rupert Evans is fine as Myers. He does it ways, but he actually works better in things like Man in the High Castle, oddly enough. But, yes, okay, obviously Sally Hawkins is spectacular, but in the supporting cast, obviously, Michael Stuhlbarg's got a nice little role. Octavia Spence is astonishing. So my vote goes to Shape of Water. Jack, what are you doing?
I don't like Shape of Water. I'm picking Hellboy.
There it is.
Yeah!
I have never liked Shape of Water. I didn't like it the first time I watched it. I didn't like the second time I watched it. I have so many fucking problems with that movie. It's maybe my least favorite Del Toro movie. And yeah, I actively dislike Shape of Water.
I will say this much.
Even more controversially than him.
I was kind of hopeful that the creature was more Abe Sapien and more conscious, because it kind of feels like she's fucking an animal, not fucking a fish man. It's like, but that's the whole thing.
I have a lot of problems with this movie that we don't have time for me to get into.
We got to bounce to the audience again.
We do. To confirm, Jack is not a freaky fish guy, despite having shown up dressed as one tonight. You are correct, Zenoff.
Jack wanted to be inside one in a different capacity.
Exactly. Maybe with my hand.
But he'd choose Abe Sapien, not the guy from Shape of Water, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah.
The creature which you don't believe doesn't have much of a name. Eggman.
Exactly. Hellboy. From
Yay!
That counts as one.
Shape of Water.
Oh.
One there. Hellboy for the win. Shape of Water is Oscar bait. Down with Shape of Water. Andy Steen, you're the man. Thank you very much. That's how I feel.
Clinched it for.
That's 2 for Hellboy, 1 for Shape of Water. I'll give it, 10, 15 more seconds, because I know we are on a bit of a delay with the live thing and then the comments coming through and stuff. So we'll bear with them. Make
your voices known.
Yeah. Another one here. Richard Stevens, have to agree. Shape of Water never quite did land for me. Gotta go Hellboy. There you go. That is
Stevens,
3 for
you're the
Hellboy, 1
man.
for Shape of Water.
So,
So,
Xenos' comment.
Yeah.
yep. And Xenos, as always, I've obviously not seen either of these, but I suspect I would enjoy Hellboy more. I'm not
Yes.
counting that as a vote for the record,
No, but
but thank you,
I
Xenos,
think
for the
that's-
support.
I think that's kind of clean sweep there. I think I'm honestly.
Yeah.
Hellboy, bloody hell.
Hellboy.
Let's have a look.
Semi-finals.
This is not how I
Oh
thought it would
God.
look at all.
Okay.
This is very different.
Yeah.
This is very different to what I thought as well.
And the thing is, this will be quick now because we've discussed our opinions on these films. I
We
say this will be
need
quick. Deliberation.
rapid
but-
fire. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's just get right into the
The really easy one. Let's rapid fire. Just no problem.
let's just get into the which of my children should I have killed. Right. Pan's Labyrinth, Hellboy 2, The Golden Army. Who's up first for voting?
It's M.
Oh
Yeah.
no! Oh no! Oh Jesus! Okay.
Well, the good
Bring
thing
me
is
the
being,
neck of my
being
beloved.
first.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
the least amount of
The
pressure.
pressure's
'cause
off.
You're not,
Yeah.
you're not
This is
Okay.
true.
deciding it.
This is true.
Oh God! I genuinely feel like I'm picking one of my children.
Yeah, it's a true
Um,
Sophie's choice.
Oh God. Okay. This has to be. It has to be Pan's Labyrinth. It has to be.
Okay.
And I'm so
That's your
sorry.
official vote.
I feel like I might cry. The Golden Army is so good. It's so good, but it has to be Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah,
It has to.
yeah.
Matt,
Pan's Labyrinth.
Hellboy 2.
Oh.
Tim, you're the deciding vote.
Pan's Labyrinth.
Oh, thank God for that. I couldn't. As much as I love Hellboy 2, I couldn't deal with another split.
I think that's it's a bastard, but I think that's. I mean, again,
I've got no
like I said
problem
earlier,
with
I'd
that
like
for the
it's
record.
got- it's-
Yeah.
yeah. It's not an easy choice. It's one we're happy. Oh, whoops! I missed the thing. It's one where we're happy to make the thing. I would happily sing the praises of Hellboy 2 any day of the week. Yada yada yada. Again, I had not in my sort of wargaming and sort of going through the bracket and seeing where it would fall out. Did not see it be Hellboy versus Blade 2. I thought it would be the exact
what
opposite.
I would have. That's exactly what I had in my predicted versions. So yeah.
It's me first, isn't it?
It is.
It is.
Shit. I mean, as I said to Emma earlier, this is the easiest place to be because it's not my. I'm almost absolved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
M's the
I'm-
difficult one now.
Oh God, I know. I'm dreading this.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna say. I'm gonna say Hellboy 2 was better than Hellboy 1 and didn't get through, so Blade 2.
Okay.
I agree. Blade 2 for me as well.
M, you don't have to worry about where you end up because I'm also going Blade 2.
Oh!
Hey.
What would you have gone for, Em?
Oh God, this one's really hard. Really hard because
One released right after the other. And
I
for me, as a
know.
sort of teenager, vitally important movies.
formative movies.
Yeah,
Especially
yeah.
when you talk about comic book movies, and
Yeah.
these are so important in their own respective universes. I know that. Yeah. Well, to be honest, whatever I say doesn't really matter.
Oh, yeah, I should put this through.
Yeah.
It means almost nothing without being rude.
Yeah.
But also, for argument's sake,
but also,
Okay,
we want to
well,
know.
we want to know,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, well, I probably would have said Hellboy just for the love
Fair.
that I have for Hellboy, but again, it
No,
means
that's fair.
nothing. So.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with registering a protest vote, a
No.
minority opinion.
Entirely.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, what the fuck is this?
How did we get here?
Yeah. People see the brackets out there, like without watching the video, and they're like, "How did you get? How?"
Yeah. Because we post the brackets on the Discord as like,
Yeah.
here's the starting bracket, here's the final. And like, the fuck did you guys do?
How
So,
did Blade
yeah.
2 win? Everything.
Yeah.
How did you... Yeah. So Jack, I believe. No, wait.
Yeah, I'm
Fine.
up first.
Yeah.
You're up first.
Yep. I am going to be controversial and go for Blade 2. I shall not. I shall not explain myself.
No way surprised.
Tim.
I am going to go with Pan's Labyrinth because I think it's transcendent filmmaking.
If Blade 2 wins, it will be the most sequelized.
That's the interesting thing is that, Blade 2, I know we're making a joke about it, but it is worthy. Blade 2
is a really good film.
phenomenal.
Absolutely.
And it is highly underrated, as is most of Del Toro's work, to be honest. And the fact it's made the final, I think, actually proves how underrated it is, because even we're like, how did this happen? And because I think a lot of people don't appreciate Blade 2 quite enough as not only just a Del Toro movie, but as a movie just on its own merit. So, I feel like props to Blade 2. It is incredible. There's so much brilliant stuff about that movie. However, and it's obvious where I'm going, I have to give it to Pan's Labyrinth. It's truly, like I say, it's his magnum opus. It's a masterpiece. It's incredible filmmaking of every conceivable level. There is nothing like it. It's the greatest thing that he's ever done. So,
fair. Matthew, deciding vote.
I choose between a film headed by a young Spanish girl or an African American action hero lead, which again,
Tax dodger.
Both both things are very, very, very bold things to do in the cinema. They're not the generic path to take. Although there's no reason to have any suspense because it's Pan's Labyrinth. Has to be.
Pan's Labyrinth for the win.
But that's a really important and interesting point that you've made, though. That the fact that the Blade series is led by a black man, and the fact that it's just such. The Blade 2 is such an astonishing piece of work, but the fact that it was essentially this black character that started superhero cinema, essentially. Is
and we're still struggling for representation in that space specifically now, even after Black Panther and Blade happened 20 years ago.
People loud Black Panther, and quite rightly so, because Black Panther is astonishingly good. It's absolutely phenomenal. But a lot of people still sleep on Blade. And I'm going to be really interested to see what happens. Well, obviously now Marvel have Blade, and we're going to have Mahershala Ali.
Mahershala Ali, yes, please.
Oh, Mahershala is one of my favourite actors. I adore that man. I'm so looking forward to seeing what Mahershala does with this character. But Wesley Snipes had the right level of kind of brawn and brains and all of the kind of physicality needed for the role. I can't give him Blade 2 enough props, but Pan's Labyrinth is absolutely worthy winner.
Yeah. I think a lot of people predicted it as the winner. It's a worthy winner, and that pretty much wraps us up with the winner being Pan's Labyrinth. Em, how can people find you across the internet? How can they find Verbal Diorama?
Well, first of all, this has been an absolute genuine joy.
Thank you for coming on.
I was quite nervous about doing this because I've only ever live streamed once before, and it was for charity. So I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll show my face for charity." But generally, I don't do live streams, so I was quite nervous about doing this. But it's actually been an incredible amount of fun to do this. I would love to come back again if you'll have me.
Absolutely,
Obviously, you're saying yes now, but I know it's probably a no when I'm called it.
No. If it was, we'd be saying, no.
Yeah. It's on record now. We said it live on the show.
But this has been a lot of fun, and in my mind, I kind of felt like this would be the eventual winner, but I had no idea what. Obviously, the rest of it.
What journey we would go on, and the friends we'd make along the way, right?
No, it's been really, really fun. So people can find me. I am at Verbal Diorama on all of your socials. So your Twitters, your Instagrams, your Facebooks, even your Letterboxds thing there.
Nice.
I'm also on there as well. My podcast is Verbal Diorama. So I've covered Pan's Labyrinth, I've covered Hellboy including an interview with Peter Briggs, and also Hellboy 2: The Golden Army. I haven't done any others of Del Toro, but inevitably they will appear at some point because I love him. Anyone who wants to say hi to me on social media, feel free. I'm very nice. I'm very pleasant, very friendly. But yeah, I'm very vocal about when I love things. But then, that's why I've got a podcast, because if you're not vocal, then there's no point in having a podcast. So,
fair.
So yeah.
And if you'd like early access to the episodes and one of these lovely little stickers, or even a little fridge magnet like this, demonstrating in black and white, but it is in color, I promise. You can also go to patreon.com/verbaldiorama and support you there as well.
Yeah, because Jack is one of my patrons, and that was a really lovely surprise, because I don't expect anyone to support me on Patreon, genuinely.
We felt the same way.
Because to me, it's just me in front of a microphone talking about how they made a movie. But yeah, the fact that there are a handful of people who support me on Patreon is so wonderful, and I'm so grateful. Thank you, Jack, for your support of me and what I do. So yeah, and thanks for plugging my merch. That's that's always nice.
But time for a while, we need to get on stickers, and I think the audience will agree we do need to get on some stickers. So
well, if you want little holographic stickers like mine, because I know people can't see, but they are holographic. Actually, hold on. They are holographic. You can kind of see. Then let me know, because I can tell you where I get my holographic stickers from.
Nice. We'll stay in touch and get some holographic stickers of our own.
Well, hopefully you'll stay in touch without the holographic stickers. We'll just speak to her about the stickers, and then we're never going to see her again. So
exactly. Yeah. We only brought you on so we could get the exclusive dig in on the stickers. If you'd like to go and follow us, I am JLW Chambers on all the social medias. Matthew, you are Stogs on all the social medias. Tim, you're trivia_lad on Twitter. Of course, you can read Matt's reviews, which are back now. We're going back to the cinema and stuff. The redwhitehand.co.uk is Matt's place for all of his reviews. Isn't it just? Isn't it? He's had it for 15 years at this point.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Since 2004.
There you go, 17 years. If you'd like to support us, it is patreon.com/sequelizers, and you can find the archives of all the live streams, all our merch, the Discord, all that kind of stuff at sequelizers.com. Nice and easy. One last place. I will say goodbye from me, say goodbye from the Gillman in full color now, in full green, unpleasant, creepy eyes. There you go. And
oh my God, the
thank
eyes,
you so much.
they're right into your soul.
Oh, they really do. They really do.
God. They
really do. Thank you, Em, again for joining us. Like I said, we will definitely collaborate in the future. Thank you, everybody, for joining us live. And thank you if you're watching later on YouTube as well. We very much appreciate the views. We appreciate the support. And we will see you next month for another live stream. Until then, see you later.